order. I have a few changes to the agenda. Barb included the warrants, but Finance Committee only meets every other time to review the warrants, so we can strike that whole section 6 right out of the agenda.
Excuse me.
Yes, Sean?
I actually reviewed the warrants that we had gone over in the Finance Committee and did include all except approval warrants of January 13th. So we already have, because I made notes, I had questions, and I made notes for December 31st, January 2nd, January 6th, and also the payroll of the 3rd. So it was only the warrants that were dated the 13th that we haven't gone over at the Finance Committee level.
So we were out of sync in finance with what?
I think so,
Okay.
yeah. And at first I thought we hadn't approved any of those warrants, but I went back to my notes and I had then observed that we had already had all the questions at the Finance Committee level, all those warrants and payrolls.
So then we could approve all of them except for January 13th, and since it's warned, we might as well go forth and do that. So we are just striking, strike my strike. Instead, just strike the warrants of January 13th. Thank you, Sean, for checking on that. We're also striking the 2 student matter executive sessions, but there will be an executive session for evaluation of a public employee under 11. And under 8A, I want to add approval of the warning and scheduling of the budget information session. That can all go under 8A, annual meeting. And with that, I would head to the clerk's report and entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes of January 9th.
So moved.
Thank you, Tim. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ann. Any discussion? I just had one small tweaky thing, is it's, you had written Gale Associates as G-A-I-L, but it's G-A-L-E, like a big wind, not like a girl's name. So just, sometimes people are searching for things in documents. So. Any other changes? All those in favor of approving the minutes of January 9th, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions?
I'm going to abstain. I wasn't here.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. Moving right along. Recognition of visitors. Hello, visitors. As you know, in practice, we will, before voting on anything, we'll take input from the public. We like to have the board discuss something first and get informed, and then ask for public comment. If there's something on the agenda that you would like to comment on, we reserve the end of the agenda. That is item 10. Before you make a comment, please state your name and wait to be recognized by the chair, and then state your name before speaking. Moving on to communications. I really had no communications except for a few lawyer things going back and forth with Barb. Did anybody else have communications to share with the board? Woo. Quiet, please. Excellent, then we can move on to committee reports. And I know finance hasn't met, but Sean, do you have anything to report?
No, we will meet again on February 5th before the regular WSESD board at 5 o'clock.
And personnel.
We just met this evening, and we came up with a mission statement. Manage and review personnel matters, review and approve 1% requests, oversee supervisory union negotiations, and that's it.
Sounds good. So we'll go over that. We all have time until 8B to review that and think if we want to tweak that, but we could maybe approve mission statements for all our committees tonight. That would make me very, very happy. Thank you, Personnel Committee. Policy and Amendment has not met, and probably I'm ready to start going on that again now that the budget season is sort of behind us, or not behind us, but the preparation and budget review session and the heavy board work is done. PPE Committee. Emily is not joining us tonight. David, do you have an update for PPE?
We are meeting next Wednesday. The extra meetings kind of threw our typical pattern of meetings into turmoil, so we're going to realign and get back to our regular work next Wednesday.
Right, yeah, the
But
problem
it'll
is,
be a little later than we had planned because Carrie just keeps packing the SU.
that SU chair is a task, Mrs. Yes.
We did have the Field Stakeholder Committee, which was a part of that subcommittee, I believe,
It's,
and that was on the 15th. That was a public meeting.
right, it's not a committee that the board members assign to it, so they're really, and there's no chair of that group, so I'm not sure how to, I mean,
Yeah, I was just sort of saying it
Yeah.
because it happened. Yeah.
maybe we could have a PPE, since it is a public meeting, maybe the PPE committee members have volunteered for the SU board, which has been a much busier board than we originally thought, but maybe we could ask one of those.
I attended that meeting as a member of the public.
Do you want to report out on it?
No, I think probably it will be better to report out, or, when more information comes to light, I think it would be probably more appropriate.
David?
Emily was there and took minutes,
Oh, that's right.
so there is a record of it.
Okay.
I don't know, was she there today?
No. Oh, no.
There were no minutes today?
There's minutes that we took. Really just followed the agenda that Gail set and gave them some feedback along the way. But I don't have formal minutes ready yet.
Right. Oops. Yep. Should have thought about that. Emily said she wasn't available, so she wasn't available for that either.
I guess I could make one comment. I was, at the previous regular meeting, I had made the comment that I was a little disappointed the way the subcommittee was chosen and that I wanted to participate. And as far as I'm concerned, it came to fruition at that meeting, what I had predicted. So it was not the most seamless exchange. That's all I'll say.
Okay, fair enough. So sorry for jumping around. Climate Crisis Task Force.
We'll be meeting with them next 2 weeks. We're just finalizing a date.
Okay. And Communications Council.
We met just after the last meeting and worked on some drafts, one of which I sent out to everyone earlier tonight. That went out to the Commons a week and a half ago, and I believe has gone out to other media sources, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
Thank you. I think that was a really good representation and sort of indicated the kind of time commitment for the meetings. I hope nobody takes from that it's only 2 to 4 hours a week, but when you read it carefully, you start to realize, oh, you have to prep for meetings and things like that. So I think it was a really good description of what the position requires, and I think, somewhere between 5 and 10 hours for regular board members seems like the right amount, and a certain amount of personal time flexibility. Does that?
Yeah, and one of the goals was to make it as realistic a description as we could. We didn't want people to be misled about what, the amount of time that would probably require.
Well, I commend you for,
Yeah,
I commend you for being,
The question for Tim too. Did the other one, the notes on the leadership councils, did that get finished did you and Emily finish drafting that?
No.
No?
No.
So that's still up there. Okay.
Yeah, that needs to be done.
you have a question, Sean?
I have difficulty hearing, especially in this room, so if David talks to you,
Yeah.
it's totally lost on me. But that does, did bring up something else. It would be, I was sort of assuming there'd be a little place for leadership council reporting, and I don't see it on the agenda, so.
I assume that's what
But I
the
thought
council
that
reports is.
you had mentioned it in an email, I believe, Christine.
Council reports, that's leadership council reports and possible appointments.
It's on this one that I got off the
The very
website
last
today.
item under there,
Oh,
under committee reports, that
It's
should be
under
leadership council
committee
reports
reports, sorry.
oh, yeah, okay,
and possible appointments.
okay. Perfect.
Sean, what I said was that the Communications Council worked really hard to make one of the goals was to make sure that we were realistic about the time commitment that being on the board would need. So that's why it had specific hours.
So thank you for doing that, Communications Council, I appreciate that. Good writing. Diversity and equity.
Meets Monday at 4:30.
Thank you. And the WSESU board continues to meet extensively over the superintendent hiring process. We are scheduled to meet next Wednesday. The survey results, I believe, close tonight. So I hope if you have not taken the survey, unfortunately, all those of you at home in BCTV land, it'll be too late by the time this airs, but if you're here and you haven't filled it out, please go home and fill out the survey. We'd like to hear from as many stakeholders from as many areas in the district as possible. Yes, Sean?
I did go on Monday, January 13th, to that superintendent forum, and it was Ann Beekman, myself, Krista from Guilford, and Robin Morgan. So there were 4 members of the public and 3 facilitators. So I think it was a little bit of a slowdown for them. They had 50 chairs set up and 4 people showed up. So I think it was a little bit of a rough start for them.
Yeah.
I tried to,
Sorry?
I tried to give them encouragement, and we had a very good discussion, but it was a 4-person discussion instead of a
Yeah.
50-person discussion.
I don't think that was the vision, so
Yeah,
we have not had long lead times on these things either, I will say, so a lot of things have been done in our effort to try to get it out and do what everybody's been asking and recommending. So we had good attendance from teachers and superintendents. Hopefully the surveys that can be done in the comfort of somebody's home will get some more parental responses. David, did you want to?
Apparently we've had pretty high participation in the survey. A lot of community sites, the Prouty Center, Facebook sites and town sites were really active. Some of the schools, unfortunately, were tardy in getting notice out to parents and students, especially the high school, which it improved toward the end, I guess, over the last few days, but we may have wound up excluding a lot of the young people that this whole process is going to most affect, so that's unfortunate.
Moving on to council reports. Do we have any appointments left?
Yes, we do.
Why don't we do that first?
Okay. So from Green Street, we have Sharon Carlton Newton, Andrea Frost, Maureen Gallagher, Abby Healy, Deb Schiller, Rebecca Stamulus, thank you, and Bryn Tucker.
Do I have a motion to approve the slate as listed by Lyle Holiday?
So moved.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Ann, for the second.
And for Academy School, we have Robin Morgan, Valerie Racine, Carrie, I'm going to butcher this one, Carrie Slasa, Nina Wilson, Zephyr Ethier, and Rich Levy.
So let's vote on that first slate, and I should have waited
Oops.
to do both slates. So
I'm
let's
sorry.
vote on that first slate, and then I'll take a motion on the second slate. So all those in favor of the slate for Green Street School, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it. I would entertain a motion to approve the slate as listed by Lyle Holiday for, was that Academy School?
Academy.
Academy School. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Chief. Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. All those in favor of the motion to approve the slate as listed by Lyle Holiday, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? The ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it, and thank you to all of those who were willing to step up and do this work. It's really fun to see them get started. And so to that end, Sean wants to share, I'm sure.
Yeah, I went to the 4th Leadership Council meeting that they had at the Guilford School on the 17th of January. And it was, once again, a well-attended meeting. A lot of input from all kinds of, teachers, and community members, and the principal, John Gagnon, was there and gave a comprehensive report of, vision. So I once again was extremely impressed and glad to be there. I have been saying to them that it isn't always going to be me, so I've done 3 out of the 4, and they would welcome any other directors, and it's usually Friday at 1 o'clock. That's the time that they've set up. I think it's first and second Friday.
First and third Friday,
First and third Friday, right?
because there are 5 Fridays in January, we do have a meeting coming up January 31st. You're all welcome.
I'd be happy to keep going. I sort of thought right from the get-go that we were going to spread it around among all the directors.
So we had gone back and forth on this before these were set up, as we were and we had left the language pretty loose about attendance, and we weren't sure we were going to get the extra 2 seats, so we might have had 10 leadership councils and 8 directors, which was going to be tricky. One of the things we thought about was assigning 2 directors, and 1 director would be assigned specifically to a leadership council, and then you'd move towards other ones so you could sort of get cross-fertilization. But how about I put that on for the next agenda? Because we've been kind of piecing and patching it together as these councils have come to fruition. But maybe it's time to really think of a vision, because there's a lot to be said for having comfort between the person who's attending the meetings and what happened. Coming into a movie halfway through is not always helpful, but it's also good to be familiar with the struggles and the challenges at each school and what they envision as opportunities. But asking us all to do another meeting is also not going to be really popular with this crowd. So that's where I thought we left the conversation in the summer.
One of the things that I said, that I would go to the second meeting of the month, but sometimes, as John just mentioned, there are 3 meetings in a month. That is quite a few meetings.
Yeah.
And I gave a pretty good report of the happenings of the WSESD. And they'd probably be happy to hear how somebody else feels about the WSESD.
Well, I'm sure you portrayed us in the best light possible, Sean, so I'm sure I can do on that. Anybody else have any reports from any leadership councils they've attended?
But he tried but was unable to achieve quorum. So there was a conversation, but there was not a meeting, and consequently should not be reported here.
Well done, well done. I went to the Dummerston Leadership Council meeting, gosh, I think that was last week. So this was their second meeting. I couldn't stay because I had an SU meeting for the entire thing, but they were really working on coming up with priorities, and Julianne led the group in kind of a activity that a lot of the teachers have used to kind of prioritize and look at what they would like for opportunities at the school so they could set their future agendas and prioritize their needs as a school. So it was well attended. It's a good group of people, so I was excited to see that up and running. And we look forward, so no other leadership councils have met as yet. Excellent. Jamie.
Liz and I are co-chairs of, Jamie Comtois, Putney Central School. And Liz and I are co-chairs of the Leadership Council at Putney Central, and it's just really exciting. I don't know what reports have come to this body yet, but we have a full slate of teachers and community members who now have had 3 meetings. And so I just wanted to say that we're looking at things around aftercare meals and problem solving that. We're looking at things, we're looking at having conversations about how to set goals and our expectations. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to report to this body and wanted to know what the expectations are for how chairs can report to this body. Should we be doing submitted reports? What form of communication should we start?
That's an excellent question, and I think Sean wants to weigh in on that.
Yeah, what the Guilford group did is they have a clerk, so it actually happens to be the 5th grade teacher. And so she writes up minutes, and then Barb posts all the minutes under WSESU under Leadership Councils. So the minutes are there. So I think that would be, that would suffice in terms of education for everybody on what is transpiring at every one of the schools. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be reported out to the WSESD board.
I think one of the questions we have documented that, Ruby is our clerk, and we do have minutes that we're posting and sending. One question I have is, there was discussion that leadership councils would be a way to share the will of that school with the body as questions came up. And so I just am curious about any mechanism. We have had discussions about what should we be voting on and sending our voice to the body. And so that was something that came up at the first or second meeting. So we don't have to take that time now, but it's a question that came up for us, and I'm just curious about that.
So I'm going to say that since I've penciled in that we're going to have a discussion about leadership attendance and who from the board is going to attend the meetings, that we should probably throw this whole reporting and how the board stays apprised, because information is going to start flowing. There hasn't been that much coming up because things have just been getting started, but I think the idea is that needs for schools will come through administration and leadership councils, and it's a good way to marry the administration to the community in a way that this board has a little bit more challenge doing. So I think that's part of would be better done as a more full discussion, and I'm thinking our next meeting might be a good time for doing that. I see heads nodding, so I'm going to go with that if that works for you.
Could I add just one thing?
Yeah.
We did set up on WSESU website a leadership council tab all of its own.
Oh.
So when you go to the homepage, it's right there.
That is
And
excellent.
it'll have a drop-down menu with any time a leadership council gets established, we'll add that to the list, and you can just click on the school, and whatever is sent to us, we'll post there. It was Liz's idea.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Liz, for the idea. Thank you, Lyle, for the execution. And we did the appointment. So moving on to any other committees I have forgotten. Excellent. Moving on to finances. I would entertain a motion to approve the warrants of December 31st in the amount of $152,174.39, from January 2nd in the amount of $287,158.96, the warrants of January 6th in the amount of $85,898.56, and the payroll of January 30th in the amount of $1,267,966.42.
So moved.
Thank you, Ann.
I second it.
Thank you, Thomas. Any discussion? All those in favor of the warrants as listed, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it. And we are on to the administrative update.
Okay, I have two letters of retirement. One person's retired and then came back part-time and is now retiring fully. So, dear Lyle, this is my official notification to you that my last day of work at Windham Southeast School District will be at the end of my 2019-2020 contract. I then plan to fully retire after 45 years of service. I'm excited about my impending retirement, but wanted to take this moment to thank you for all the opportunities that I have experienced working in this district. I've genuinely enjoyed my employment as elementary art teacher and will miss my students and co-workers when my retirement day comes. Feel free to contact me if you need additional information. Kathy Crafts Allen, and Kathy is an art teacher here at Oak Grove. And the other one I have this evening, dear Lyle, please accept this letter as notice of my intent to retire at the end of this school year, pursuant to the separation benefit agreement in our contract. I've had a wonderful career working with students in our district and am so grateful to the Guilford community and fellow colleagues for giving me the opportunity to grow and develop as a classroom teacher. I'm also thankful for the support of mentors like John Gagnon, Larry Alper, Amelia Stone, and yourself who have supported and encouraged me along the way. I want to restate my desire to continue to work in the district on a part-time basis, however I can be of service. And that's from Jen Kramer, and as you can see, a teacher in Guilford.
I entertain a motion to approve the retirements as listed by Lyle Harvey. To accept with regret.
I can make that motion. That we accept the retirement of Kathy Allen. What's her?
Kathy Crafts Allen.
Crafts Allen, thank you. And Jen Kramer from Guilford on both those individuals, extreme regret.
Thank you, Sean. Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Thank you, David. All those in favor of accepting the resignations as, which I can't write, as Sean, with extreme, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
Each year we create an organizational chart. This is the most updated that has all of us as one district. It has the SU and it has Vernon. It's just for your information. It lists either principals or program directors, finance, technology, etc. So I'll let you look at that, and if you have any questions, you can send those my way. I'm also giving you what's pretty close to the final draft of the 2021 calendar. For now. I think I sent it up there. So again,
Closest we ever get.
there's that for you to look at. David had asked for a report out on restorative practices, so I wanted to do just a quick update. I just want to make sure that the board knows that I had contacted and been in touch with all the principals so that they know that Mike Sostak, who oversees the restorative practices program at BAMS and VUHS, is available to work with students or staff. Steve and I had talked about it. More than once, he has reaffirmed that he will release Mike if a school wishes to have him. We can stipend Mike if he needs to take time after his work hours through diversity equity, because this is actually an equity issue. What we can't do at this point is pull Mike from his position, because that would mean hiring someone to take his place, and I don't believe that at this point our budget would be, that would be best for our budget. Not having this, a restorative practice coordinator doesn't mean we're not focusing on restorative practices. Pretty much all schools have some sort of either training or work going on with restorative practices. And all of our schools are working with trauma-informed practices, building classroom communities. Principals are here. I don't know if any of you want to speak to that. You know, Putney last year spent pretty much the whole year really looking at restorative practice. Mark, both when he was at Vernon and now at Green Street, have done that. This year at the high school and BAMS, we've had people coming in looking at trauma-informed, which we feel is a step toward working toward restorative practices. So anything?
Yeah, I think, for the high school, we've really begun to embrace the idea that trauma-informed practices and restorative practices overlap. And that if we're going to create truly trauma-informed and trauma-transformed school environments, we need to put in the time, we need to put in the energy on very focused, directive community building within all of our classrooms. And that has been one of our goals this year, and it's going to be one of our goals next year, to kind of spend more energy in that direction. Next semester, we have some teachers who are going to be piloting for us, using community building practices in their classroom explicitly with an eye towards creating a trauma-informed environment. It's a process that, when I spoke to the teachers about it, the biggest requirement they have right now is time. Because it's not a practice where you just do it and call it done. It's a process where a teacher and groups of teachers need to sit together and really have structured reflection time to think about what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, so they can come back and do it. So if there's any one item that we need at the high school, it is time to kind of do that work. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
I think Mark and Herb.
Good. Sure. Yeah, at Green Street, we have a very strong restorative justice team, going on 6 years now. We've put a ton of resources and time and PD into trauma-informed practices, especially over the last 3 years specifically. And we are exploring, continuing to explore, more opportunities in developing restorative practices. Just yesterday at our staff meeting, we did some PD around restorative circles. So every classroom teacher within the next month and a half will have conducted a restorative circle with their classes. And we're looking at turning that into a normal practice, a routine that we use for a morning meeting. So significant amount of time and energy has been put into restorative practices. It's been really great work, and it's really helped move our school forward in a more forward-thinking way.
Yeah, so at Putney, we're in our second year with restorative practices. We try to think of it as part of our whole school, whole child approach to social emotional learning. Traditional thinking around restorative practices focuses oftentimes on the restorative aspect of it. In other words, something has happened and now we need to make it whole again. What we're learning is that it's most effective when we focus on what Steve mentioned, actually, that they're trying to do and work on at the high school, is about relationship building. Teachers getting to know kids well and vice versa, so that when and if the inevitable conflicts arise, they have the toolkit to help the kids resolve conflict without it getting too out of hand. And so far it's been great. We've worked with Mel Motel going back to last year with the teams. It's been part of our professional learning community work once a month. And we have a 2-hour optional workshop on the PD day on the 27th for teachers and staff. Anybody who wants to attend can do it. And we'll follow up with another similar training on a Friday afternoon when we have winter sports. So everybody will get that 2-hour training. So that's pretty much where we're at right now. We see it as a logical extension of the PBIS work that we've been doing for 11 years now at Putney Central. So it fits in. It's all of a piece. The mindfulness work, it's all important work, and we're trying to do what we can in order to make sure that all of the kids have somebody in the building that they can turn to when they need to.
And there's a concert tonight at Academy School, but Kelly and John, if they were here, and I think you heard them report out at their school about the ongoing work that they have They spent last year really researching what other elementaries are doing across the state. You may remember we had actually, as an SD, applied for a grant, which we didn't get, but the academy folks went ahead and did their training. So this year they are implementing that. So.
So if, what you said, Lyle, is that Mike is available, he'll be released if the school wishes to have him, but it can't pull him from his current position. How will that work? He's in in-school suspension. It's not a scheduled program.
So what would happen would be a principal would say, I could really use your help running a circle. The principal would let Mike know, Mike would let Steve know, and Steve would be able to cover that for a couple of hours. It would be different if every day at, let's say at lunchtime, Mike is now released from the in-school suspension to do restorative practice. That would mean hiring someone that would be in there permanently. It's a little different from just, we can cover that for a couple of hours.
How much would that cost to hire someone for that in-depth position? It's not a professional staff position.
It would be classified.
How much is
Half-time, yeah.
a budget? It'd be 20,000.
With plus benefits?
Including benefits. Yeah, including would be full-time is about 40,000
40,000.
for a parent.
That doesn't seem unreasonable to me. I think, and again, I'm not an expert in this area. I don't know anywhere near what you all know about this process, but the things that I've learned and I've heard consistently from everybody I've talked to is that we're in a situation where we are intervening relatively effectively on a growing problem, and that what's needed is that needs to be replaced by prevention. And that requires a conscious systemic approach to changing the culture so that every student has experience in circles all through their school career from pre-kindergarten on, that they all share the same language, that they are familiar with the same practices, so that by the time they get to the high school, the amount of intervention that's necessary won't be necessary. And I think if we don't invest in that, if we don't free somebody up to actually do the coordination that the people that are involved in it, whose names you mentioned, all said or all agree is needed to move the process forward. I think if it's not a coordinated, conscious effort, it's going to, it'll be haphazard here and there, and we won't see the necessary change that we need to see if we're going to be able to change the culture in a manner that controls that has a better effect on the behavior problems that we're having right now. You got Christine's come.
I agree with a lot of what you said, David. And I think I can just speak for Green Street, but we're improving our capacity at the building level. So it's becoming a cultural thing that we're all doing. So I feel like I don't really need that level of extra support because we're building it within our team and people are owning it. And that's been a very powerful experience.
And again, at the high school, and I'm glad we're having this discussion because it's important work and it's work that we really have to do. At the high school, we've got a group of teachers that have taken now two or more courses on trauma-informed practices, and from that have done that work with restorative circles and community building. And so, as Mark said, we have the capacity. We have a group of teachers that are ready to do this work and ready to share this work. That's why we're doing a pilot this spring, so we can share that work. I guess if there's one resource I needed, if we had extra funds, I guess I would want to use it to somehow create structural changes in our school day so we could have that time to do the work. So the teachers could have some reflective time, some time to do some purposeful work in that area.
Schools that are PBIS schools, and a lot of our schools are, there's tremendous resources that PBIS puts out there that are free. And we've been accessing that throughout the last 2 years as well.
So I guess I'm curious, because it seems like if we have somebody that's great, and I've heard from, Steve, you have Mike in your wheelhouse, and Mark doesn't feel like he needs that level of assistance, but it's a good question. is there some way that this time, 2 hours of this time could be used with a support staff person managing an hour or two so that this resource could be spread among the district? Would that be a good use of relatively small amount of funds in our current budget? I mean,
It would mean hiring a new person. Because this would be a new position, I would have to check with the union, but it also may mean opening up that position to advertising and accepting other people who may be interested in applying for that job. We can't automatically put a person into a position. We've been told that by the union.
so we would have to advertise a half-time position.
For the restorative practices coordinator.
Oh, I was envisioning the position, and maybe I'm losing it. I was envisioning it as like an assistant, like a paraprofessional position for the coordinator who would be there to cover the lunch, cover an hour and a half a day that would allow Mike time to work with other.
It seems like a small thing, but right now, Mike's title is not WSESD Restorative Practices Coordinator.
Okay.
He works, he's a WSESD employee, but he works at the high school with the understanding from Steve that he will release him when other schools request him. So to release him permanently at a certain hour of the day, we would definitely need to hire someone to be in his space, and of course we're on TV, so we're not flying under the radar, but we're going to try to fly under the radar, I guess, for the rest of the year using Mike in that position. If it were to continue, we would absolutely have to open that up.
I think there's the thought that Mike would not have the lunch duty, he would be available during lunchtime because he seems to value the lunch duty as some of his best contact with students, so that would probably be a net loss.
Right, and I guess, if I think about how a part-time employee, it would be tough because we would have a person, like we might have an elementary school that wants Mike in the afternoon, and then another person might want him in the morning, and so we wouldn't do set times. We'd have to figure out a way to have that Paris schedule be flexible and coordinated with Mike's. That would be tough to schedule. I guess if we're going to do that, I would almost say, and Lyle's not going to hear me say this, if we're going to do that, then I would almost say we should bite the bullet and hire a person to take over Mike's planning room duties at the high school, and because we'd restructure that and then release Mike to do the work district-wide. Yep.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to add that Mike also works a lot with the middle school students with more restorative justice, often conflict between students, and often using a high school panel to facilitate the conversations. He sometimes handles them himself, but often he'll bring in a panel of students, so I don't know how that will kind of fold into it all, but it's like, it's a different approach, the restorative practice versus restorative justice, but he serves multiple roles.
Well, unfortunately, all our principals aren't here, so I can't get a feeling for if this is a need that all the principals feel would be important. So to add to the budget when we don't have that as an identified need and things seem to be okay in a really tight budget year, I'm not inclined to make that motion. If there's some creative way to do it with part-time, I always like to think creatively of how we could stretch something or move something around or do something. Yes, David?
No, I don't think it's fair to say that things seem to be okay. I mean, we continue to add behavior staff and human services staff, and we continue to add to the numbers about out-of-district placements that we face. And the way we're dealing with the impact of low income, of poverty on our families is really expensive. And this is a way that is much more holistic, it's much more engaged with the community, and much more likely to make a long-term difference. And I understand it's not an easy thing to do. It's not like buy a curriculum and put it in place and give everybody the training. And I know that different schools are doing things differently, and they really value the different cultures. But the thing that's consistent across these cultures is the impact of poverty on these kids. And we can predict their test scores based on their demographics. We don't have to look at the tests. You can tell ahead of time what their test scores can be, simply by where they come from. That indicates that we're not really making enough impact. And this seems like a way, maybe getting Mike Zostak around at the other schools isn't the way to do it, and I understand John Sessions was really good about helping me understand that it really has to be organic. It has to really grow from within. It has to be done the way you're doing it, Mark. But at the same time, it has to go faster. It has to be more intentional. I mean, we wouldn't put any program in these schools. You people wouldn't put any programs in these schools if you hadn't really thought through really carefully what the structure was going to be, what the anticipated, unanticipated consequences. You put it all together, including how much the staff costs and how much time they spend in each place. But this is something that, I mean, I don't want to sound sort of hopeless about it, but this has really been an intractable problem forever. I mean, I'm not sure where somebody said the poor will always be with us, but it seems like that's true. But the impact of poverty on kids in our community is really pretty obvious. And what we're doing isn't enough. It's incredible. It's an incredible amount of work. People are just working themselves to the bone. We've heard from the administrators about the impact of these, the trauma and effect on them and on the staff. And this seems like the only really effective way to improve the situation. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm perfectly willing to be proven wrong, but hiring more behaviorists and sending kids off to district placements doesn't seem to be getting it done.
Well, they're not silos.
Yeah.
These people work together in our schools, and that's really important.
Yeah.
From counseling to restorative practices to ABA responses, they're not siloed people. And when we think of social emotional learning, all those folks need to be working together. So we're building those resources in our schools. The key is systematically, how do we become more effective and how we work together. And that's what we're working on.
Yeah. And Steve is working with his, sorry.
I just wanted to let Lyle.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Because I agree with a lot of what you said, but I do want to make sure that people know that implementing restorative practices is going to take time, and it'll be time before it has an impact, and we are still going to see those out-of-district placements, and we're still going to see the need for, excuse me, the social workers. But as Mark just said, they need to all be working together.
And that's what I was hoping Mike's function would be to coordinate those efforts. I mean, that was the description. That was what they said they were looking for. So that's kind of what I had in mind. I'm not sure where it's gone off track, but that was the
Well,
thought.
I guess I think I would love to hear what the board could do to support, like, I was like, oh, so you want a longer school day? Is that what you were asking for, Steve, when you were asking for time to do this structure? But I didn't throw that out there on camera because I thought you'd kill me, but.
Well, I can tell you what I like.
Okay.
What I really like is a late entry, initially once a month and then maybe more frequently. A late entry where students come to school and we start classes at 10:15. And during that morning time, our teachers do the work of restorative practices. They do the work of trauma-informed instruction. We take the time, like right now, faculty meeting's a half hour at the end of the day. So, I mean, what I would look to do is to, in other schools have done it, I would look to have us do a late entry. I mean, ideally be once a week, and I know that's a dream, but I can dream. But I would say that we would do a late entry, and we would use that time to have structured conversations with teachers, to do the PD, to have the conversations about what's working, what is best practice, how do we establish a tier 1 whole school approach to building community in every one of our classrooms, and how do we make sure that it's happening in a biology class consistently with how it's happening in an English class. Because for the high school, that's the big challenge. We have 65 professional staff. And so that's, the resource we need is time. And, right now, CVU, Mount Mansfield, South Burlington, those high schools are all doing this model.
I guess that's a much larger discussion
Yep.
that we would need to talk about, but I don't think it's impacting this budget that we're talking about now particularly. It may impact the way professional development days have been sorted out here for teachers. It may change that. I do have a concern because I know in my town there's children that don't go to school when there's a half day because the parents have to go to work and they can't get to the bus, it's too far. So that's something I've consistently heard, that these half days are challenging to people when they are not on a convenient bus route and they don't want their kids walking down a road that's hard to get to. So I think we need to really think about that does school become less accessible to kids who's have single parent households and that parent has to work, which there's a lot of those. So that is my real on the ground concern that happens in the outlying towns a lot more, that we make sure we're covered for that. So I'd like us to think about that for all of us, and I'm happy to entertain that discussion. Yes, David?
Are you, Steve was talking about high school students. Is that true for high school students, that it's harder if there were a bus that came at whatever the time, the second bus run would come on that one day, we'll start with a month. Is that an issue obviously for elementary kids, that's not gonna work. But would that be the same issue?
I know of one family that it was definitely a high school person, high school student, that it's like 2-mile walk to the bus, and they didn't want their kid walking on the road. It wasn't a safe road to walk on. So.
Well, as is often the case, if we don't try to do something, or at least create the ability in this budget for something like what Steve just described to happen, then it's 2 years. And as they said, it takes a long time for these things to happen, and the longer our budget cycles put us behind a year for everything. So I'm really,
but I don't think you're
like to see
asking for
something
additional
solid
training, you're
happen.
asking for time. And time is money, but not in this case, right?
Well, if it was a high school only, time would be money, in that we would have to find out from the bus company what it would cost to run the bus runs later for high school, middle school, career center.
and
We have-
probably
and I-
provide some monitoring for students that had to come on the first bus.
Right. Well, there wouldn't be a first bus. So we do an elementary run, and then we do the high school run later. So, and I can find out, I can ask.
Yes, Sean?
If what I heard correctly from the administrators that have spoken is that it's something that's happening within the schools, all the staff members are getting involved, and, there's a lot of value to that, as opposed to integrating another person with a different idea, which may be very valuable, but it's the fact that everybody is sort of recognizing the problem up front and center, and, it's becoming a focal point, and I think that has a lot of value.
That's what I've been trying, that's what I've
Yeah,
been trying to convey.
that's what I heard you say. So, I think, that attitude or that knowledge is, I have a lot of respect for it. The other thing is that, we've been going over and over budgets, and the night that we are considering approving the budget is at the best time to be thinking about another big, maybe not big, but another budgetary expense. I would rather have it developed, more carefully and, with all input from all administrators.
I think I have a much better idea of what it would look like and what the plan would be. I would like a more well thought out process of what, systematically, how would it work?
I wanted to add that each of us, I think all of us have our own leadership teams within our building, principal and teachers who join a leadership team. And those teams often kind of help develop our action plans and kind of plan our professional development. And really, you know, I'm sure Mark has used that model, or I assume he's used that model to help develop this. And so it's important for each of us to work with those teams to look at what we're doing with trauma-informed practices, to build it in-house, to build the capacity and the common shared understanding that this is the direction we need to go. At BAMS, we've done a lot with trauma-informed work, or a fair amount. Staff have identified that's a need. I want to see resources to be able to bring in like a Mel Motel or a Joelle Van Lent, who we've worked with. They're experts in this area. These are their careers. And to bring them in and maybe have a day where they just come in and work with teachers in the classroom. It doesn't have to be a PD day. It can be a regular school day where they come in and work with teachers who are starting to do some of this. So from my perspective, I'd like to have more time to really look at it as a school and talk as an SU as well around the direction we're going here, and have resources available. But I'm not personally necessarily feeling like it has to be a person. It's a resource that I hope we would have, whether it's time or.
So Frank, do we have to approve the budget tonight?
It would be helpful to do that, but no, you don't have to. One discussion that I've had with Lyle and Barb about, if the board wanted to have the document available for town meeting, we'd really need to approve it tonight, but there's no legal obligation. The thinking is when citizens are all together at town meeting, it'd be great to have that. And even tonight, it's not a guarantee we can make that deadline. Generally, town offices like documents like today or tomorrow is usually the latest in the month to be ready. So it's possible if we approve tonight, but there's no legal requirement to do that.
Because part of my thinking is, I think that the board shares the passion that the administrators we've heard from have for this program and want to find a way to support you, and would be interested in putting some money into the budget. It's very hard to put some money into the budget when we don't know what it is, and we'd like to get the budget out in time for town meeting day, but cannot do that. And so I don't quite know how we could proceed. I take Sean's point. I don't like doing this last minute, but I think it's something that I saw a lot of head nodding when I said, what do you want? And they were very clear there is something they really would like to do that is more helpful than what the board was starting to envision for this. So
I feel like we have a way forward for this year in that there are only a couple schools that haven't really embarked on it. We could pay Mike to do some after-school work with those schools. We could ask Mike to put together something that would be an implementation plan for the schools that haven't yet started. The schools that have started are well into it. So I think adding another person into that mix right now, that would, there'd need to be a lot of work with the principals and the people at the school overseeing the restorative practices. But for the schools that haven't jumped in yet, I feel like there is a place. And by Steve letting Mike be released for certain times.
So would it make sense to have the board consider some sort of dollar amount that would allow for some extra time of Mike's and some of Mel Motel's time to work with schools, and perhaps even a couple of late start days with buses, so some amount that could be used however administration sees fit to help this program along? since we can't get a cost on what, there's no way we're gonna work that out in the, what would be the thing.
Suggestion, but first, what Mark and Sean said about being careful and really consider and taking time to do it and do it really well is absolutely correct. I mean, I have no question. I just have also no patience. But I think that we do have a way forward right now. I very much would like to see if the administrators could find some time in the next week or two to just come up with some sort of a ballpark figure. And it may be you can move some professional development funds around, but they're pretty much planned and done more than a year ahead of time. So it may need to be new funding, but I would really appreciate if you would put some effort into that and start thinking about how to make this happen the way you described it and the way Sean described it. Just really carefully thought out and implemented. And worst comes to worst, we could hand the budgets out at town meeting to people. You know, we just give them to them. They wouldn't be in the booklets, but they could see it ahead of time.
That'd be a really large printing expense, though, like in addition to.
Well, we'd be doing it either way.
Well,
Well, unless the town paid for the printing.
Question. Paul Smith, Cricket Coordinator. I thought I heard that for the interim, some of the voted on last year diversity funds could be used to provide the stipend for the work that Mike does for the remainder of this year and possibly into, I was sort of assuming, possibly into next year. So it's not as if there isn't budget money available for that sort of work. Am I correct?
Yeah, I was going to mention that as well, you know, so if we coordinate the work at the SU level as well, because remember the SU board added $162,000 for related work, and then the SD added $100,000, so there's $262,000. Most of it is new money. Some of it's not new money because the high school had a portion of that already in its budget and it got moved. But generally there's, you know, you're aware that 200,000 of new money to this system, that those resources, I've met with Michaela, had some discussions with Lyle about where the direction of those resources are going in the FY20 and 21 plan, and it's, you know, clearly there's some, you know, I think well-defined objectives, but it appears to me that there's a fair amount of, you know, flexibility in the way in which those get implemented. So I think that.
So the things we've committed to have not used up those monies, and there's monies in that. Thank you, Frank. It's like Christmas.
Be careful not to spend it twice. It is directed.
Oh, I'm very careful not to spend anything twice, and the fact that I'm wanting to up a budget shows that I'm still feverish or something, but I'm excited to find out that there's money available, and that makes logical sense to me that it would come from that. So we look forward to working with administration and hearing how that money is supporting your programming. And thank you, Paul, for pointing that out.
So I have one more thing under administrative.
Thank you for all the information and the support. Appreciate that.
Thanks for being passionate about the topic.
So we had determined at the June annual meeting that we would be sending informational postcards announcing this year's upcoming annual meeting on March 17. We have sort of a mock-up of what those postcards would look like. If you want to add to the postcard the dates of the public information meetings, we'll need those dates tonight. So I don't know if that's later on the.
I had that in my ad, scheduling the budget. That was one of my ads after I got this from Barb. So, which is actually our next item. So we can just right into that, which is scheduling our budget information session, which must happen between March 7th and 16th. And that way, when that postcard goes home, people can attend the informational session that we will have to do before the actual annual meeting. So, any thoughts between the 7th, well, the 7th and the 8th are probably not good because that's the weekend. And the 15th and 16th are also the weekend, so that leaves us between the 9th and the 14th. For administration, is there any night that works better for you? Because I won't do it unless I can phone a friend.
March 11th. So
Okay, that's-
Wednesday, we're kind of used to Wednesdays.
Sounds good to me.
Excuse me, but that is the same night, I believe, as the Brattleboro Municipal Informational Session for their representative town meeting. Would be a conflict there, I think.
Is the representative meeting on the 21st?
Yes, and the informational meeting is 10 days earlier.
So the
Thank
10th,
you.
the 10th is,
10th, Tuesday? Does that work for you, Frank?
I could do that.
6 o'clock? March 10th, 6 o'clock?
and where is this going to be?
That's my next question.
Seeing as we have Steve here, should we do it at the multi-purpose room? At the sound of the multi-purpose room is not good.
No, yes, I've noticed. Yeah.
The one in the middle school is better, isn't it?
Do you feel like
We're
it's
the
better?
best.
You're the best? Apparently, they're the best.
Was the band's multi-purpose room the location that was just decided? I mean, acoustics are really helpful.
I don't see anything in our calendar that would prevent it.
So, I would entertain a motion that we schedule a budget information session for March 10th at 6 o'clock at the BAM's multi-purpose room. Thank you, Tim. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, David. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. We have our budget information session scheduled. Barb, can we get those postcards to the printer?
And where is the annual meeting?
At the high school.
I assume it's at the high school.
It's where it was last.
Yeah.
In the gym.
In the gym. But we had good miking for that. I think it
Yes,
was.
we all have mics and things.
If that was okay.
And we will get mic runners and the whole thing.
That was awesome.
I'm also going to take care of this before we launch into the budget, so I don't. Oh, I'm sorry.
Moving back to Putney. I guess I may have missed this at some point, but I thought that there was a point, I'm about to raise issues about childcare, I'm just warning you. I thought that you were going to be considering at some point a timing for the annual meeting that was easier for families that have kids in the school system to attend. Last year, you had childcare, which was awesome, and I really hope you're considering it again this year, but the clock stopped on the childcare before the end of the meeting. And I think that if there's a commitment on the part of this board to encourage engagement by parents, then you have to prioritize either adjusting the time of the meeting for the future, even if it fails and you put it on a weekend and nobody shows, but figuring out a time that's better, or really making it a priority to have adequate childcare and advertise that there's adequate childcare in advance. So I don't know how that factors into your postcards and things like that, but I haven't seen that conversation. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened on the part of this board, but I just don't want that to fall away as something that you're considering.
So we had discussed it as a board, and the process for having the SU hire childcare took about 3+ hours of the superintendent's time, because it becomes a supervisory union employee. And so they have to be fingerprinted. we're not very successful at finding internal candidates, so you have to make sure that people have gone through the process because we're hiring them. So it's not just calling up a babysitter. So we had spoken about when leadership councils are up and running to have leadership councils be one of their charges for when the meeting is occurring in your district, that the leadership councils find people to do childcare. Leadership councils have taken some time, so it takes it off of the superintendent's plate, which is generally a full plate, and allows it to be a little bit more streamlined for childcare and doesn't put it under the requirements of a school district that we're hiring childcare. I have hit up my daughter to come do it though, and my son is coming as well, and she's CPR certified and everything, so I am working on that, but it will not be, I'm not putting it on Lyle's plate for this meeting. And the date of the meeting is set, and that was set at the last meeting. So that could be reset at this meeting, I guess. But, and maybe St. Patty's Day isn't the best day of the year, but maybe it is, I don't know. But this meeting date is set, so there's nothing we can do to change that. And I think, according to Ruth Barton, a long-standing member, that weekends were horrendous for getting attendance. They were the absolute worst attendance level. So when they tried that. So I think a lot of permutations have been tried. And I believe the quote was, short of giving out a free bedroom set, increasing attendance from an evening during the week meeting has not been successful. So. Yes, Liz.
When you were looking for childcare last year, did you ask professionals?
I asked all.
Did you?
I sent it out to every school news folder, asking every teacher, paraprofessional, all classmates.
EES and
EES.
At the preschool.
Probably not private providers.
I called in personal favor from the early childhood education world to do this. So it was a leaning on my part to find somebody who was certified and a personal favor that I had to call in. So it was not simple. Yes, Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie from Putney. Lyle and Christina and I think, hustled collectively to try to find people. And I remember going in the hallways and asking every para-educator who was already fingerprinted. I volunteer to help coordinate that now so that we could find somebody, so we could include it on the postcard, so it's not on your plate, Lyle. And I do agree with Ruby that this is something that's so critical for our new district to make a commitment to, and I would make a commitment as a volunteer to hustle and coordinate with my principal to identify people at Putney Central who might be interested, and I'm happy to coordinate with other schools that would have similar folks, that if they had 2 months advance warning, they could put it on their schedules. I think we were struggling because we might have been pretty close to the date, as I recall.
Well, the other issue was it was after summer started for.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was right when summer came. Yeah, it was the worst day ever. So this, I feel much more optimistic that someone would like, because I recall that we had a compensation. It was.
Yes, and I assume the board would compensate again.
Yeah.
Jane, just so you know, we need to get these postcards to the printer by next Wednesday.
Okay.
So if you can be
I can secure somebody by Wednesday?
Yeah, we can put it on the postcard.
I volunteer to secure someone by Wednesday.
Thank you, Jamie.
Okay.
Contact my daughter for assistance.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to the warning for the upcoming election. I think I will read it because this wasn't distributed beforehand. Warning, special meeting, Windham Southeast School District. Legal voters of the Windham Southeast School District, including the towns of Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, and Putney, are hereby notified and warned to meet as follows. Brattleboro at the American Legion, 32 Linden Street, Brattleboro, Vermont, 05301, between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. In Dummerston at the Dummerston School, 52 Schoolhouse Road, Dummerston, Vermont, 05346, between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. In Guilford at the Guilford Central School, 374 School Road, Guilford, Vermont, and Putney at the Putney Central School, 182 Westminster Road, Putney, Vermont, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. on Tuesday, March 3rd, to vote by Australian ballot on the following article. Article 1, to elect 6 school directors from the nominees to serve on the school board of the merged Windham Southeast School District from the day following the annual district meeting. 1 school director who is a resident of Brattleboro for a 1-year term. 2 school directors, 1 from each town, who are residents of Brattleboro and Dummerston for a 2-year term. 3 school directors, 1 from each town, who are residents of Brattleboro, Dummerston, and Putney for a 3-year term. The legal voters of the Windham School District, including the towns of Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, and Putney, are further notified that voter qualification, registration, absentee voting, and voting procedures relative to said special meeting shall be provided in chapters 43, 51, and 55 of Title 17 Vermont Statutes annotated, dated this 22nd day of January 2020. I would entertain a motion to approve the warning for the special meeting with Windham Southeast School District.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Sean. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ann. Any discussion? Yes,
I
Tim.
may have missed it. When you talked about the people who are running for the 3-year slots, I think, and maybe I spaced out for a half second just before, so maybe I missed this part. I thought you said from all of the towns?
One from each town.
Previously, because there's not one from Guilford this year.
No, one for the 3 school directors who are residents of Brattleboro, Dummerston, and Putney.
That's the part I missed. Thank you. Never mind.
You're freaking me out there for a minute. This has been no small feat wrestling this little devil to the ground, so and it's confused by people taking over seats and everything. But I'm feeling comfortable. It's been run by the attorney, and as of equal importance, it's been run by Barb, and they both agree. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to approve the warning for the special meeting for the Windham Southeast School District, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I'll pass it down for your signature. Okay. And that brings us to the budget review, and I believe there's extra paper copies of the budget for.
We have some extra copies up there, yeah. And we'll be sure it's on the website tomorrow.
Excellent. So, how would you like to proceed with this, Frank? What
I
do you
can
think
give you
makes
an
sense?
overview of the documents, pretty briefly, and then we can have, our usual discussion, questions, if you like. Is that okay?
Does that move forward? I think it does. I see head nodding. That sounds good.
If you're okay. Okay. So I've emailed you the summary document. It's a 1-page summary document. I'm sorry, yes, I emailed that to you this afternoon. And then I had emailed you earlier revised budget document and then the detailed budget. So I can go over that.
That's here, right?
Yes, that's there. And then I thought we should also review the capital plan. It was part of our discussion last board meeting, and so I summarized each district into a single document, and I can give you the overview of that as well. So the summary document with the graph on it, that reflects what's referred to as functional overview of the budget, as opposed to a site-based presentation. And functions meaning direct instruction, vocational programs, as you can see under the expenditures, support services for students, administration, operation of maintenance, and food service, as well as debt. So this is a way of looking at the same information that we've been considering But as I said, instead of site and then salary, benefits, services, supplies, equipment, this is everybody together. But what are we doing in direct instruction? What are we doing in support services? So as you can see also, we discussed to some extent potential retirements. Our union contracts requires notice by January 15th, and we did receive several notices. And so on the second page of this summary document, I have updated where we were at the last discussion on January 8th at $51,311,000 in total expenses. And then on page 2, the revisions since then largely associated with those retirements and the projected replacement expenses. You can see we reduced the version we discussed on January 8th by $140,000. And those are reasonably conservative estimates of new hiring scenarios. When we go back to the summary page, with those reductions, now the revised total expenditures are up by 1.8%. So we have a $50,276,000 current plan. I'm looking at total operating expenditures on the first page. And this proposed budget $51,171,000, which is a 1.8% increase over the present budget. I've left the $800,000, as we had discussed, as use of fund balance to reduce taxes. And the graph, maybe the only thing I would point out there is obviously the largest portion of the expenditures, this is a percentage of total, is in direct instruction. But also, I argued against the state's classification system of putting the special education assessment in the 2,500 group, which has historically been associated with fiscal services. But that is what they've done. So I just wanted to point out that you see the second largest wedge is the darker blue. That's 16%, and that's almost all special education services. So, you know, as a member of the public, I would be, you know, I would suggest that you consider that graph from the point of view of the two blues are essentially the same investment. It's special education is considered a direct instructional service to students. So there are the overviews, and maybe one other quick comment. As you look at the first page and you see a 1.8% change, clearly there's no real dramatic changes in spending, but maybe the negative $154,000 caught your eye in support services for instruction. And so I just wanted to comment. We're not cutting programs. What that reflects is what we talked about last week, our last meeting. It's approximately $103,000 of really good programming for grant funded in the Career Center. It is not being requested in the fiscal year 21. Those are one-time grants that are getting programs off the ground. But then, you know, I know Nancy's here, and she spoke to this last meeting. Those sort of investments in cybersecurity and there's some automation, manufacturing automation will be integrated into our existing curriculum in the future period. But this helps us get those programs off the ground. So when we go to page 3, taking these adjustments, putting them into an estimated tax calculation, So we have two favorable developments since January 8th. One is, as I've just mentioned, a reduction of another $140,000 out of their budget, so that on the first line there shows the 1.8% change, $51,171,000. The other favorable development is line 15. We've got a revised average daily membership turned into an equalized pupil count by the Agency of Ed, and we've risen by 9 students, which is great. So we were 2241, and now we're 2,250 students. You see that on line 15. And with that change, those two changes, we're now under 19,000 per student. I was hoping that we could get there. So 18,954 you see on line 27. And those calculations result in a lower tax rate from our previous version. We're now at $1.74 is the equalized estimated homestead tax rate, which is a 2% change. And then probably more importantly, the income sensitivity threshold of 2.83% is a little bit lower than our previous version. And it's a change of that 1.8% versus the current year. So no adjustments. I've received no adjustments to the CLA. So those calculations are based on the $1.74. Another quick reference for you on page 4 through the rest of the summary, 4 through 10. We had some feedback from members of the public around just ease of accessing the information. We added a page reference column to the far right, and that was actually just this afternoon, so you haven't seen this version. So for example, Academy School on page 4 is the first site. You see the references to direct instruction, support services, and so on. And then down on regular education, you see the page references. Well, those are on pages 1 through 11 in your 130-page detailed document. So within any section of this budget, you can hopefully quickly get to a more detailed section if you needed more information. The other thing is just reminding you on page 2, I've put in the account numbers on the far right. So if you really wanted to get into the details, you could look at the version you had on December 18th. You could look at this version, and it's those account numbers that are different. So that's where you would see the differences in the detail.
While you're on page 2, can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
It says art teacher Dummerston 75 and .25. Is there a reason that's somehow broken?
Elementary and secondary.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you. Oh, I would have gotten there. Thank you. Sorry, Frank.
Yeah. So there's the overview. No program changes since our last discussion. Just primarily staffing turnover, and then there was a little bit of a alignment of the 21C grant program with the revenues, so that had a favorable impact. Yes, Sean.
I know you said this before, but maybe if you could reiterate why the increase, the 18,954 is above the threshold, but we do not get penalized
Right.
for the, and I can't remember exactly how
Yeah.
that all comes around.
Projects that were built before 2007 in the state of Vermont, that went through the public school approval process and got state aid. Those projects, so the Brattleboro Union High School project and the Putney School project, were approved, and the cost per student associated with the bond payments is exempt from the calculation. And that's about 800, did I have the number in there? It's, yeah, 875. So, you know, we still have to raise $18,954 per student, but we don't get penalized on the approximately $200 that is over $18,756.
And then I guess my next question is, looking at Guilford, Guilford actually has a 10.8% decrease in the previous budget. If you can speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, this budget process was much more, logical from the point of view that we knew our governance structure, we knew the legal entity that we were developing. The prior year, fiscal year 20, we did not know that until late May, well after budgets had been developed, in January, February. So Guilford has one of those payments that existed in fiscal year 20 under the old assumption, and then in the new, it was dissolved, and that is the payment from Guilford to UHS for the BAM's tuition. So there was $380,000 that's in the kind of the basis for fiscal year 20, and then when you go to fiscal year 21, $380,000 in direct instruction is not in that assumption. So when you pull that out, Guilford, I think the increase is still up about 5%, as I recall.
Yeah.
If you were looking at,
We still pay for the band student, but it's just in a different location budgetary wise.
well, it's one of those things that because we're now all on the same equalized tax rate, there is no differentiating, a cost per student, and it actually the cash flow is eliminated. The same teachers that educated the Guilford students at BAMS in 2019 and in 2020 and 2021 are all the same, the same expenses. There's no new expenses or any less expensive. It's just that we're one entity, so we're not paying ourselves. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that, we have a capital plan, obviously has an impact on a general operating budget. And we have later in the agenda discussion about the Academy project that we talked about, the feasibility study last meeting. So I just wanted to mention again, maybe a reminder that we've got capital reserves this fiscal year that this general operating budget is not increasing reserves for the Windham Southeast School District. We are drawing on reserves from the legacy districts. So I don't know if you want to have a discussion about the Academy addition and then vote on the budget. It may have an implication about debt service or not. I could see us separating the two motions and not having them connected by doing a bond anticipation borrowing. If say, hypothetically, the board wanted to move forward with the Academy project and you thought it was going to affect fiscal year 21, we heard last meeting that, well, it's unlikely you're going to finish the project in fiscal year 21 and cut a check for $1.4 million. But even if we did, I'm saying I could borrow in anticipation of a bond and push that expense into fiscal year 22. And that's why I'm saying you could vote on this budget and make it independent of what you do about the Academy project, or you might want to vote on the Academy project to know whether or not you want debt scheduled in this budget.
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah, normally we would have sequenced it differently, but, you know, it's just, we had so much to do from July to today. Yeah. So normally we would sequence any potential bond before the budget development process even starts. You know, normally it's in September or prior to May. It actually was, you know, discussed and very well thought of through the Brattleboro Town Board, but obviously we have come from a different place.
Any thoughts from the board about separating the two or trying to schedule in bond payments for next year on the, assuming we approved one or both of the academy projects, scheduling it bond payment for next year or not, and waiting? David?
I think we got the cart ahead of the horse. We haven't seen the proposals. I mean, we heard a presentation, but we also talked about alternatives. And unless everybody else, other people got it in the mail, and I didn't see it, but I don't know what the proposal is going to be. And we don't have to approve the budget, either one of them tonight, so I would rather see that. I also have questions about the capital plan that I wanted to also address at some point.
Yeah, I did assume you wanted to have, I haven't talked about the capital plan yet, but I assumed you, before you voted on the academy project, you would want to have that discussion. So ready to do that. I just didn't want to jump over to the capital if you wanted to.
No, I didn't have them in a particular order. I had them in the bullet base of things that needed to be taken care of tonight.
So since it's all related, shall I do an overview of the capital plan? And
that
then we'll
sounds
maybe
good.
Bring it all together?
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so the legal size document that I had emailed earlier, it provides a summary of all the capital plans at each of our sites in the Windham Southeast School District. And the information on the top block is the same in terms of the total dollar spending as in the lower block. It's just two different formats. So the top block on page 1 of 17 in this capital plan is the type of improvement. So taking all of our buildings and looking at how are we proposing to spend money in fiscal year 18 and 19 are actual what we did. You see heating systems have been a very large part of our capital spending. And this is across all schools. And then the mechanical fire protection and the signal systems, meaning phone and that sort of thing, PAs, that's the next block of spending you see there. Roof systems is going to be a growing expense, and as you look out like FY24, you see that's where we really start to tackle that, and we do have a fair amount in the coming year. And so on. We have exterior wall systems, doors and thermal improvements. We have some grounds improvements, and then sites. And the specialties are lots of different things like playground upgrades and so on. You would see those in the detailed documents. So in total, for fiscal year 21, we have $1,240,000 in projects, and then fiscal year 22, $960,000. If you add up all 5 years, going from 21 to 25, we're at $5.5 million in projects that either a principal, a maintenance director, or someone in one of our consultants has recommended that we have useful life systems with useful lives that should be replaced. The next section of the report is the same information, as I said, the same for FY21, $1,240,000 when you look at that total, but it's by site, high school, Green Street, and so on. The far right-hand side of that, I also have the page numbers for the detailed reports if you wanted to get somewhere quickly. The last thing on the summary page here that's important to keep in mind is the funding sources. So fiscal year 18 is the first column. We just like to have some history on the documents, see where we've been. You see we have 1.68 million in reserves. And then we've gone to 2 million in reserves. And then we start utilizing those reserves in fiscal year 20. See 700,000. We go down to 1.4. And then the intent is in fiscal year 21 and 22 to utilize those legacy reserves, get them down to zero. This is all part of also complying with the state law. Concurrently, though, we do want to be creating the new reserves for the Windham Southeast School District. And at this point, we do not have a contribution to a Windham Southeast School District Capital Reserve Fund. We created the fund last June. The electorate created the fund. But I've just drawn this to your attention that we're intentionally utilizing legacy reserves that were restricted based on the Articles of Agreement that the State Board developed. So, we have a well-funded capital plan as for the next 2-3 years, but we certainly need to go to work in identifying how we're going to sustain the level of investment that you see we have. The other thing that's very significant is fiscal year 24, we have the high school bond payment of principal, 1.6 million coming off the budget. And we know the assets that paid for are about done. They need to be replaced. So obviously not site work, but air handling units, roofing, transformers, heating plants. So Robert Clark has got that very well identified as we go through this. So there's the overview. I'm happy to go over the detail, but maybe just to show you one report, and then they're all the same in terms of format for detail. So page 2, the upper left of the document tells you what site you're looking at, upper left corner on page 2. So this is the BAMS Career Center High School campus, so all 3 structures. As I say, the format of the document is relatively consistent. It's basically heating systems, and then what goes with that, boilers, control systems, the piping and valves, air handling units, the cooling systems. We don't have many of those, but there's some. Fire protection, mechanical, lighting, and then signal systems. Next page is continuation, roof systems, exterior walls, and then the power distribution. The high school has more than most sites for the athletic and field improvements, so that's there. And then we have some of the specialties. For the high school, it's the elevator and some other flooring projects, and we've done some food service kitchen upgrades. So each site, you'll see that kind of detail. You'll see the year that the major asset was installed, and then you'll see the useful life projected. So, for example, on page 4 of the high school, that top line, just as an example. So we have a maintenance shed. Its install date is this year. It's what you had awarded to Allstate Construction a few meetings ago. And we expect that to be a 50-year life. So then you see that the estimated costs are in this case 2 years. Fiscal year 19 was mainly the design work, and fiscal year 2020 is the construction. If you go all the way across to long-term replacement, it's just the year 2020 plus 50 years is 2070. That's the next time we see this. And the notes are just an update on what was involved. At the bottom of the document on page 4, there's the total of all those other pages, and so it summarizes by fiscal year. For the high school, the fiscal year 21 proposal is $480,000. It's identified in the document. And then for each site, there's this funding source. Eventually, this probably will go away, and it will just be one funding source at the end of the document. But because each district had a restricted reserve, that's why you see that in here. Again, it's the very bottom line is what I look at is it's the fund balance in that fund. The high school had $946,000 in FY17, and then $1.4 million in 18, and $1.6 million in 2019. And then you see where we are using those reserves in 20, 21, and we use them all up in fiscal year 22. So fiscal year 23, if we don't do it any earlier, we got to start contributing to the reserve. So that's the format of the report. You'll see the Brattleboro town is by each school site. Upper left generally tells you what district, or now it's what site, what school building you're looking at. And then page 11 is Dummerston, and Guilford is 13, and Putney is page 15 and 16, and then that first page summarizes all of that.
Thank you for this, Brett. And for your usual thorough and understandable presentation. So I have a couple, maybe we'll talk about, we'll do it sort of last in, first out. We can, if there's any questions on the capital plan, we could do that, because that will fold into the general budget and talk about if we want to start socking money away to the capital plan, if that's okay with the board. And I have a couple of questions. One, I know that old Dummerston board did not have a very cogent capital plan, so I'm wondering how, like, is this realistic as we have a new principal trying to really understand the needs of the building, and she was not left with, from her legacy, just a very good capital plan. So I'm wondering if the Dummerston is realistic, and then I'm wondering, are there other issues coming up that might affect this capital plan, because we haven't had a chance to take a deep dive into all the schools that.
Yeah, good question. I think the urgent issues are all addressed there, or they are scheduled. So that answers that question.
So it's pretty realistic.
But Dummerston is the one that we do need the most, I would say, review. We did have a very good energy audit in 2000, I think it was 2017. It was part of that Clean Energy Development Fund with the Windham Wood Heat. So we do have good guidance. I know Dummerston has an energy committee, and they've given us some feedback. And then the other very positive thing for Dummerston, but it's also for all, is that the electrical purchasing is through a solar array. That doesn't affect our capital because we're not going to buy that field, but it's related to energy use and the investments. I think I do want to review the timeline of the boilers. I haven't had a chance to really get into that with Julianne, but 2024 is out there a ways, and I know they had frozen pipes and some unpleasant surprises over the last week. So
no frozen pipes in this, but no heat.
Okay. We did do quite an investment in the control systems. You see it, Dummerston, page 11, control systems, 2017, $38,000 for an upgrade. I do remember working through that. But it's amazing how quickly those things go obsolete and how technical they are to keep running. So, yeah, I do need to revisit that.
And would we consider alternatives to oil heat for those replacements?
I would hope so. Every site we have gone away from oil, and it's only those sites. Oak Grove, I think, was the most recent oil boiler replacement, and Dummerston had just done the control system upgrade once that energy audit came through. But yes, that's our first choice, is a biofuel. Yeah.
Any other capital plan questions? Oh, I know I have one. Just kind of a nudgy numbers question, but when we talked last meeting about when the high school debt payment is done, obviously the needs for keeping the high school facility in good stead will increase, but I don't think will it be at the current $1.4 million debt amount, or can we expect that there would be more money available for district-wide capital needs?
Well, I do think that there will be more money available for district-wide. To get a gauge of that, if you look at that page 4 and just the total for the high school, the FAMs, you can see how fiscal year 25, we plunked in on that first line there, operating budget annual appropriation. You know, that's the convention we've been using to be in this very good shape. And you can see that we've ramped that up to 1.5 million in fiscal 25. But even in doing that, we only have 600,000 in left over after those investments. There's another 200,000 in interest expense that goes away. The total is 1.8 million right now, and so that 1.5 million, I think it's definitely a very rough number. But it leaves a substantial amount of resources in the $51 million budget for the other sites.
So we have a couple of years in there that are a little tricky.
Yes.
To get to the other side of that high school bond.
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious to hear what your recommendation would be to make sure we are able to meet the needs in 22, 23 until we've got that bond paid down.
The main source of funds, in addition to, let's say, about $100,000 per site, has been historically in the operating budgets. In addition to that, it's been the budget surpluses that the boards have approved to be transferred into the reserve fund. I would guess, off the top of my head, it might be half and half. Half the funding we have is a planned appropriation on the tax rate out of the general fund that goes into the reserve fund, and maybe as much as half is, like at the high school, it's more tuition students coming in than we foresaw, and that creating revenues that could be transferred in. These kinds of variances have happened at the other districts as well. These surpluses. 2 years ago was actually a special ed surplus. So I would never count on a surplus for the future, but if history is any indication, we may have a source of funding that emerges through surpluses. So that's part of the tricky place we're in. It's a contingency we can't predict at this point. And then the other is We know that we're at 19,000 almost in cost per student, 18,954. This budget doesn't lend itself to adding for a future reserve where we already have sufficient capital reserves. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation after this fiscal year ends, and we're looking toward the fiscal year 22 budget, that we'll have a much better plan on what FY22, what it needs from the general operating fund to get back on a firm footing.
And what we might have.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that answer.
So one last thing, if I could, is just because if we do want to talk specifically about the Academy project later on in the agenda, just so you see it, it's on page 7. Oak Grove starts on page 6 and ends on page 7, and then Academy starts on page 7 and ends on page 8. And the project that you heard from the Stevens and Associates and from Kelly and John last meeting is on page 8 in the renovation modular. And you can see what I've done is just put a series of $100,000 assumptions, and that would be a debt payment. And I do have one in FY21, and I've got $50,000 this year. So both of those fit within the reserve. So we do have an appropriation in the general fund budget in the Brattleboro town sites, the schools, of about $300,000. So there is new money in the tax rate coming in to fund these projects. But you can see the proposal is to spend more than that. So you kind of get the summary of that on page 10. When you add Oak Grove, Green Street, Academy, Canal Street School, Estiville School, you get to page 10, and that's showing us that the operating budget for fiscal year 21, the budget you have in front of you, has $284,000 in new money in it, and then an assumption of 103 more that will be basically drawn from the reserve. And this is assuming you approve the project. If you don't approve the project, then I would adjust this schedule.
And by project, you mean both projects?
Yes.
Okay.
And then maybe one other point, David, you mentioned, you wanted to see an alternative to maybe the feasibility study design, and I would suggest that that is really important that we look at alternatives, but it's generally something that you get from a bid process. You ask for a base bid with what will meet a permitting requirement and the state education quality standards. And then in that bid process, you ask for whatever the board and the educators feel meet the learning environment needs. So it seems to me it would be unusual to make that, that future analysis the determining factor as to whether you move ahead to meet the needs of the students at the academy school based on a future sort of alternative plan. And I say that from the point of view that Kelly and John have worked very carefully with a professional consultant, and they've come up with that feasibility study that you saw that meets the urgent need for learning in that site. A bid process will tell us whether there may be another alternative design, but I'm suggesting that we don't want to defer the solution for those students to some future study.
Any other capital plan questions?
I have a couple little ones. I think I don't have an old capital plan here, but I thought that the high school roof was sooner than 2024, and I thought it was more than 474. Am I just remembering that wrong?
No, you're remembering correctly, yes. I asked Robert Clark to update this, and he has looked at it very thoroughly. He had to do some seam repair and some other sectional repair. He doesn't like to do that because that's if it's only going to get you another 3 years, he'd rather replace the whole thing. But he couldn't wait. In the section that required that 400,000, you're remembering correctly, it's not done, but it has, the useful life has been extended. And there was another couple of projects that he's added just in the last couple of weeks that you haven't seen yet, that he's saying is a much more urgent issue, and it's on page 2, and it's in the middle, control systems. He says there are literally hundreds of these control systems. They're devices that tell each unit ventilator in each room to open a valve and to turn on the damper motor to bring in fresh air or to circulate. There's hundreds of those throughout the building, and they're becoming obsolete. They are obsolete, and the problem is that he can't reorder them, and they're failing. So you see 150,000 in a series of FY21 125, and then FY22 150, and FY23 150. You see that's the replacement for the roof.
Oh, that was part of what was in that bid?
Yeah.
Well, in that estimate.
In the estimate.
Yeah,
he's feeling that that's urgent.
Yeah, and the only other comment is that we have, what's the total that we have right now in capital reserve?
For the, which,
right now, the whole SD.
For the whole SD, that's on that page 2019, 2,117,000.
So the 1.4 is not.
That's projected if we implement the
this
plan,
year.
Then it would be 1.4.
Right. So you have 1.4, and we're going to spend about half of that.
Yes.
Per your suggestion, we did.
Yeah.
And would that still mean that we have to borrow? I mean, my point is that I would much rather use the capital funds to avoid debt service, especially if we expected this.
Yeah,
we need to spend them. That would be the way.
I subscribe to that theory.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I've been always concerned that Brattleboro has too much debt, and I've been reminded of that by the Vermont Bond Bank. Brattleboro, the town of Brattleboro, and the high school at one time were one of the highest debtors in the state.
Town's nice and low now.
And the high school's got to get there real fast too. But the answer is no, in that you can see if the project you heard last week was 1.4 million, and if we built that in FY21, we've only got 600,000 there. And the problem there is that's not all. We got these restricted balances. I wish we didn't have them because we're all one, and why do we have restricted balances? But we do. So Academy can't spend the high school's reserve, is what that comes down to.
Oh.
Right? Oh. So, I mean, that's what that article in the Articles of Agreement said. If you have a restricted asset, you gotta implement it as it was restricted. So it will be, as you can see, no problem for us to do that for each site. The high school and Brattleboro Town are the two sites that have a couple of years to go before you totally consume those resources. And so Guilford has a reserve as well. But
I didn't realize that I thought restricted meant it was committed to a specific project, not that it was in a capital fund for that those schools.
Yeah, I'd love to get a broader clarification on that, but that's what I've been informed. You know, and I'm not concerned about it just because all of the projects here are, they're well understood, they've been considered over 4 or 5 years by each board, and there's just no question that we need these improvements. So we will spend those monies at those sites. So the answer is we can defer the debt a little bit, David, if we approve the academy project, got it going. Or another way to say it, we could accelerate the spending of the Brattleboro Town Capital Reserve pretty fast. You know, we could take whatever reserves are left minus the project cost and then borrow that amount, right? And I always recommend not borrowing if we can.
Thanks.
Yep.
So I just want to clarify what you just said. You would recommend us accelerating the Brattleboro Town District spending if we go forward with the Academy project on that, so then taking out less debt for that project?
Yeah.
Okay.
There also are and I was pleased to see, although I feel bad about everybody else, but I was pleased to see the Oak Grove roof and windows are in there as well as the Academy windows.
Yeah.
Where's all the money coming from? I get it.
Well, yeah, no, it's a good concern. We will need to, if we don't borrow for that full project, 1.4 million, then we'll have to start coming in fiscal year 22 with general fund appropriation to fund, Oak Grove and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to fund any debt that we take.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure Franz noticed that we're looking at 7-cent tax increase right now, and that's with a 1.8% budget increase. So that's kind of scary.
I have to say, I really appreciate your saying that we should be spending down those funds, because don't we get penalized if we don't use them within a certain amount of time?
Within 5 years, yeah.
So we should be spending them down,
Mm-hmm.
so that even if we kind of offset it with
Mm-hmm.
putting some more in the other account.
Right.
So we should be mindful of that, I think.
Yeah, but at the same time, we want to, recognizing that in 5 years, we've got a cumulative $5 million improvement. So we want to have $1 million going into a plan to just stay break even. And we don't want to be running where 1 year you have no capital investment and your tax rate is artificially low, and then the next year you add $1 million or $2 million, and your tax rate is very high. We want that nice steady trend. The only way you get there is by having a good reserve that it should be between 5 and 10% of the total operating budget.
But I'd hate for us to be really careful on those funds, and then at the end of the time be, to rush to figure out what to do with them.
Yeah. We won't have a problem with spending it.
I think one of the reasons that we've got the $1.2 million payment every year is that there was a lot of maintenance that was put off, particularly in the high school, and a lot of upgrading that needed to be done that didn't happen, so it wound up costing $50-some million. And the idea is to spend $1 million every year for 50 years instead of all of that at once. So that's not very realistic, but to try and keep up with things rather than have to do it all at once.
Yeah.
So anything else from the board on the capital plan? Yes, Sean.
Well, I guess would this be a bond issue? Would it be a bond vote?
I would recommend that the Academy project be a bond vote, and then the question is, how much do we borrow, of the 1.4 million? And we've got a fair amount of time between now and if you approve the project for us to figure out what are we going to spend, and then what do we have available to to pay directly out of reserves versus what do we need to borrow.
Anything else from the board? Jamie?
James Holmeswell, Putney. I wondered what considerations have to be taken into account with the discussions about potential special ed cuts and how that intersects with the reserve funds for capital improvements and other budgetary considerations, so we don't get into a crisis in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so special education is through the supervisory union, as you know, so that's a different entity. And the supervisory union has a fund balance as well. It's been substantially reduced, but it still has a good fund balance. So if there is a deficit, we do anticipate one this fiscal year 20. It doesn't affect the school district, the Windham Southeast School District doesn't affect this budget. It affects the supervisory union budget. And the only time that there would be an adjustment in advance of the future budget plan that has to fund a deficit, if there is one, is if the supervisory union is facing an insolvent situation, meaning they've got to hire somebody or they've got a contract for services more than their resources, meaning the annual budget that was approved plus those reserves. Because it's a different entity, this budget is unlikely to be affected until fiscal year 22, if at all. The hope would be that the fund balance covers the deficit at the SU, and there is no sort of, settling up. It just means if there is a fund balance, it's because there was a surplus at one point, and over time, the surpluses are used for the deficits.
Ruby McAfee Putney. I guess I just had a question that was related to the field resurfacing project that we've talked so much and you've talked so much about over this year. I guess my recollection, I want to understand where that lives in this capital plan, because my recollection of last annual meeting was that the main expense lived in that legacy capital reserve fund, and it sounds to me like the academy project is also living in that, and it just feels like it's a finite pocket of money, and I just don't see how anything's been earmarked, if something has been earmarked or thought about as kind of a placeholder of this much money for field resurfacing. How are you tracking that?
Yeah, so that was part of the capital plan for the high school, and there still is a resource in the capital plan for field maintenance. I don't know, do you have the document?
I do. I thought that field maintenance as separate and apart from the resurfacing project expense.
Yeah, so that page 3 where we have Natavich Field and we have that series of $125,000. That's similar to the Academy project in that it would have been an assumed debt payment. And that's what the article had approved at the June 25th meeting, I think it was. Borrow up to, I think it was $750,000. And so that those cash flows would carry the debt. So it's still a plan to address the issues that were discussed. It's the particular solution is still to be determined.
Yeah, I wonder if we should change the name on that and the description to change it to field improvements and either leave that or leave a smaller amount of money. We don't know what that's going to cost or what the proposals are going to be, but there was a lot of misunderstanding about whether that represented a commitment to spend that money on the things that were in the capital plan. I think it would be better if it didn't say that. You just change that to field improvements or field upgrades.
You know, so there's, you see the different locations there, in, you know, Tenny, Natowich, and then the track, and then the practice field. So what's helpful about identifying the location is that it helps define the project. But I agree with you, at this point, that project's not been defined. But the reality is, based on what we heard from Steve and from Chris, is that that field is overdue. And so whether it's grass or turf, or I'm not sure, but I think the reference was to 1965, was it? So they've done a great job maintaining it, but it does need an investment. So by identifying it as a potential, none of these are like, oh, we've made a commitment to anybody. None of these things into the future are.
You know what, that might be a really great disclaimer to put on the document, that none of this indicates, because especially as we become a larger district, you might say, well, we were going to get our roof done and this was promised, but actually they looked at the roof and it wasn't. So to say this is a projected, just as an explanation, that none of this indicates for sure it's been funded, because when you see something in writing, you tend to believe it's true, and that might be a nice way to clarify all those. It does not mean that we've committed to these things. These are just projected possible expenditures.
That all these, just say all these things depend on board approval.
Sure.
For the expenditures.
Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. Yes, Franz.
Hi, I'm Franz Reitzman, Brattleboro. So the overall fund balance situation, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and that there was going to be a decrease in the general fund balance over the next few years, and now also a considerable decrease in the capital fund balance. So how does that leave us? What do the numbers look like, and how satisfied are you with the overall fund balance over the next few years?
We did visit the general fund. I don't know if you were with us that January 8th meeting, but just as a reminder, we talked about fiscal year 19, all the districts ending up with 4.2 million in fund balance for the general operating fund. And then we're going to use 1,017,000 this year according to the plan. We'll see if that happens. So 3.2 million, and then 800,000 is scheduled, as you know, in FY21. So 2.4 million for the system, and that's still a fund balance of just under 5% of the operating budget. And so that's a little on the low side of the range in terms of what I would consider prudent. But given this is the first first round of the merged districts planning process, and I thought it was a reasonable position. It is also another reason why I recommended not taking more than 800,000 from fund balance for fiscal year 21. So keep in mind, 2.4 million, just a little under 5% in the general operating, and then we have the 2 million that we just discussed of capital resources. That's a good financial position for the school district for fiscal year 21 and 22. We need to go to work for fiscal year 23, 24, 25. We need to focus on restoring reserves, no longer restricted to a site, but a reserve for the merged district.
So you would anticipate taking money out of the general funds and moving it into the capital budget at that time, or perhaps the capital reserves at that time?
If there's a surplus, I would recommend that, and if there's not, I would certainly be recommending these $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 line item appropriations in the general fund
I'm smiling here just because it's amazing to me how much you sound like Peter Elwell talking about the need for infrastructure investment. And not only is the approach and the fund balance thinking the same, but even the amounts of money that are needed every year turn out to be very similar.
Okay. It sounds like I'm in good company.
I think so.
Good.
Of the $1 million club.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and to just underscore, I think 23 is going to be a very tricky year when we still have the high school debt. That's going to be the really tricky year, because I think the problems get lessened once the debt is 23 and 24 then, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually fiscal year 24.
Oh, so it's 20, so we got 2 tough years there.
Yeah.
Cut out.
And that's why if we approve the Academy project, we want to be thinking about how much do we borrow, because it will compromise fiscal year 23 and 24 if we don't borrow any, enough. So I will have some analysis for you.
Okay. Would you all like to take a look again at the full-on budget? The buildings are nice, but the teachers and the programs, we do that too here. So, and the advantage of going first tends to get more of our attention. Let me gather my correct papers. My multicolor sheet. Oh, that's why it is. It's open to the wrong page. Okay. So, thank you, Frank, for wrestling 9 students out of the Agency of Education. Those will use the money well.
Yeah, and I do want to thank Steve and Paul and Gary Parzic. We send our data, we got it back, and I pushed it out to everyone that was part of the oversight of that, and they said, hey, I think we're missing a couple of kids, and they really worked hard with the Agency of Ed's back office, whatever they call that team, and we got our added students because of their efforts, so I really appreciate that.
Because that's like $150,000,
Yes.
basically. Like, in order to get that same bump,
Yeah.
we would have had to cut our budget by $150,000, so.
Bob Whitford was another key person.
Thank you all. That's really important. And also thank you for going through that process of looking at positions and figuring out where we can get the savings there, because when I consider a 0.7 increase in equalized pupils and a 1.8% increase in budget, which is due to things really beyond our control, like health insurance. It's way beyond our control now because the state's managing that for us. And special education, that seems much more, and being under $19,000, which was I don't like to be over the threshold, but to be over $19,000 did not feel good. I feel much more comfortable personally with this budget. I'm only speaking for myself, but we were kind of talked last meeting about how we felt about the tax rate going forward, and our concern that we didn't want to spend any more of our fund balances because who knows what's coming down the pike next year. And I think Frank, you've echoed that quite well in response to Franz, that we were comfortable at the $800,000 mark. But I just wanted to check in with the board about their overall feelings about how this budget looks for the other $50 million that we're spending this year. And if they had any concerns or questions, they wanted to have Frank answer. Yes, Sean.
Well, I spent quite a bit of time going over the budget as proposed on the 8th. And I get a little uncomfortable. I talked with a lot of Guilford people, and just looking at the increase and so forth. So I think that what has been done is real needed relief. And I feel very, I know I said this on the 8th, but now I really do feel comfortable with this budget. So, and as a further thought, it would be really nice to have the annual report available on the 3rd of March, so that there, you know, it'll be a build-up to the 17th of March, which will be the annual meeting. So I think the more, you know, the more viewing people have, I think it's better.
Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? A 178 pages and no, that was not that many, 128, sorry. 129 pages. Anybody out in the public? Yes, Ruby McAdoo.
So I'm hoping that Frank could speak to on the budget summary. To me, what jumps out is the food service operations differential. Seems that's the largest jump percentage-wise, and once you dive into as much as possible the line items of where that increase, what happened, I don't feel like there's gotta be a story, because it doesn't make sense. It feels like there's like one school jumped astronomically and another is flat. And so I just wonder if you could speak to that, because if I was sitting in an annual meeting, that's what my hand would go up and ask.
Yeah, the major change is the high school going to Provision 2. And unlike Brattleboro Town Schools, they didn't qualify for the community eligibility provision, which is a very high subsidy based on poverty. So the high school has the same effect for the student, in that all students have access to the child nutrition program meal, both breakfast and lunch, without paying. But of course, there's a cost to provide the food service, and the Provision 2 requires that the difference between what you do qualify for reimbursement and the cost has to be made up by the district. So that explains the major change. In prior years, students paid if they were not qualified for the free and reduced lunch subsidy. And now they don't, so the loss of that revenue was not made up by the USDA child nutrition subsidy. And that's what's caused the increase. The other general background on food service is that the state required Vermont districts to go to a cost per meal bid contract. I wasn't very excited about that. I was pretty concerned about the quality, because when you're cost per meal oriented as opposed to menu oriented, the incentive for the provider is to just cut costs, which generally means cut quality. Cafe services have been very good to work with, and I rely on the feedback from our principals and our teachers and families, and the feedback has been very good. And then, as you know, the Putney model is working very well also. So we have community eligibility provision for the Brattleboro 3 sites, and we have a individual self-employed, self-run model in Putney. We have Provision 2 at the high school and Guilford, and Guilford and Dummerston are in what was the same format prior to all of these changes.
Can I ask one follow-up question that's really specifically for the equity committee? That's really an interesting explanation, and it's helpful in seeing that, substantial bump in the budget. But as someone who I don't have a kid in BUHS, I don't understand the food system there, and so that's interesting. But I'm just wondering to what extent, at the higher school board level, thinking about equity as far as the substantial investment in the cost of providing the breakfast and the lunch to the high school students at no cost to them, whether or not that was something that's considered in a more holistic way in terms of all of our schools. And I know that this is like a super can of worms, and the whole, are we ever going to get universal meals question is one that has been discussed and put aside and comes up every now and again. But it's hard for a school like with Putney, where we live just right underneath that, universal meal kind of cutoff, and we as a community, we do pay for our meals. And I'd just like to understand to what extent the board considers this issue of equity, particularly when it comes to budget time and this type of an expense related to one of the schools affected. Just a question.
So my question would be, would you like to cut the Putney food program and bring it in line with the rest of the district? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking the equity committee if they...
That would be programmatic equity, not my equity.
Right.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
So I'm asking that committee if it's been considered.
So
I'm not proposing a solution. I'm asking if it's been something that was considered holistically.
So the equity committee has not. They've actually chosen to work on after-school programs. Actually, and there's only so much they can work on at a time, so they've really been focusing on programmatic outcomes for all students, which is really the forefront of the work we're doing, and then has taken a focus on after-school program. Is that correct? Is that correct? After-school programming and...
We're focused on a lot more than after-school program. I wish that was all.
But those are the first things you've been working on. You haven't taken...
No, that hasn't come up. And it's interesting that you mentioned it, because recently, I can't remember where, and I don't think it was something was introduced as legislation, but it might have been, but the state legislators, and I can't be more specific than that, have been talking about a bill for this year to just say, that's it, we're just going to pay for meals, universal meals for all students. We're not going to do this collecting and all of these other things that we're doing, and including and excluding people. And I think if that doesn't happen, well, first thing, if everybody in this room went home and sent an email to our legislator, to your House rep and to the two senators, and said this would really be valuable, it would go a lot further. It would be a lot more likely to happen. But if it doesn't happen, and I'm not sanguine about that happening, it would make sense for us to take that up next year and talk about whether we just want to do it instead of them. But again, we haven't talked about it. It hasn't come up.
If I could comment also. So the food services also come from a place where the relationship between the chef, the menu, the students, the faculty, families at each site has been relatively autonomous. That they have to follow the bid specification, and in order to qualify for a free and reduced lunch or breakfast, you have to provide a certain nutritional content, and there's a great deal of oversight. But my point is that from an equity point of view, the programs have evolved primarily through the sort of standards set by it starts with the individual administrators, And generally, there's a committee that they meet with and get feedback. And that's really the origins of the Putney, independent system. But each system has had that flexibility in developing a program and emphasizing no one can deviate from that core USDA requirement that it makes a meal eligible. But I would say in terms of choices and quality, that the equitability is probably not an issue, but in terms of which students have to pay for a meal and which students don't, that's an issue that I've been concerned about and do hope to see some more attention paid. And it would be so nice if the state would step up, knowing how important it has been for those families.
And I think I'll follow along with, we did speak to administration about this at a previous meeting because we were concerned about this, and they spoke to the importance of children being fed when they come to school. And I have a 15-year-old boy at the high school, and you would not want him having him in your presence if he hasn't been fed. So I think that they really spoke to the importance of making sure they all get fed. And I think while it was a big jump last year, when you look at how many students were feeding for that, assuring $176,000 per student to make sure they're all getting fed is how that money has been extended. And I think we're investing about $80,000 in Putney for 170 students, so I don't think our investment is inequitable, particularly. But how that investment looks in terms of people paying and not paying may be inequitable. And so maybe that's something to consider, that we consider how we can allocate a per student amount and try to get all students fed throughout the district. But if we're going to do that and create that equity, it's going to be difficult within this budget if we were going to provide that without help from the state. So, write your legislator. That would be great.
I just want to point out that the proposal that David mentioned, they want to take that money out of the ed fund, where all the, except for the pre-Ks that are actually located in a school, all the meal stuff goes through the Agency of Human Services. So to me, it's like they already dumped so much on the ed fund that taking $5 million away from it is $5 million less for education. And if you want to write, I would urge them to push it over to the Agency of Human Services, where it probably belongs.
I'll take that friendly amendment to my previous suggestion. Thank you, Liz. And if you can keep track of what's going into and out of the ed fund these days, more power to you, because that changes faster than what they put, how they make us format these reports every week. I feel like I'm not doing my duty if I don't have one really super nudgy question. Because this has been under the spotlight a bit. I'm just interested in why, and I apologize, Steve, I should have asked you this. You know what? I'm just going to ask this offline because it's not a big dollar value. So, and not delay this any further. So now we can talk about whether we want to include the Academy project or consciously uncouple it from this budget vote. And we could get
I
this.
would recommend you do have them two separate votes. I just wanted to make sure you realize that one could have an impact on the other.
So I'm interested if there's an motion to approve this budget.
I would make that motion. I move that the WSESD board approve the budget for 2021, $51,171,300, which represents a 1.8% increase from the previous year.
Sounds like you've done this before. Well played, sir. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tim. Any further discussion?
Budget, Dave.
Sorry?
I was telling Dave we were voting on the budget.
Oh, there's a motion on the floor to approve the budget. Any further discussion? All?
One other further discussion. Didn't we just ask the administrators to try to put together a ballpark number for progress on restorative justice, or was that going to come out of, did we say?
That was going to come out of restorative justice.
Thank you.
That's included in here.
That wasn't paying attention.
All those in favor of the motion to approve the FY21 budget in the amount of $51,171,300, which will result in a 1.8% increase in our spending over FY 2020, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes appear to have.
Abstain.
Abstain, oh,
I
sorry.
want to see the academy numbers first.
Okay, well, while you were out,
Oh,
we
you
took
did that
academy out of this
Oh, okay.
discussion while you were out of the room,
But
sorry.
you didn't take it out of the budget.
No, but
There's
it's
just
just like
300,000,
capital
well, not
plan.
300,000, but there's quite a bit of money in there. So anyway,
But we took it out of the budget vote.
okay.
So are you still abstaining or are you voting for it?
Yeah, I'll still abstain, just because I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm not gonna.
I like your style tonight. Okay. So the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. We have passed our first unified budget. Thank you, Frank. Thank you all. Thank you, administrators, for all your input. And the public as well. So, getting back to my laundry list. We have our budget review meeting schedules. So while we're on budget, I'd like to understand, to get the board thinking a little bit about the process of budget review. Last year, I walked through a general review of the budget and answered questions, and Frank was there to back me up. Last year, I also had the backup of all the previous chairs of the boards, so now you guys are my backup singers if I do it, but if somebody else wants to do it, I am more than happy to pass that along, and I'm more than happy to think of a whole new format. But we don't have to decide that tonight. But if we want to reimagine things, I'd like to have some time between now and March 17th to sort of work on that presentation.
Christina, I have a question.
Yes, Jamie.
As somebody new to this process from the public and as a parent and as a former school board member, I have found it very challenging to understand budgets, particularly now that it's 129 pages. And so what I would really appreciate is the Dummies Guide to Budgets intro at the beginning of the info session, and however that works on the 17th potentially. Just to say, here are the general way of understanding budgets. These are the patterns to look for. This is something unique to this budget cycle because we're in a new merged situation. We've moved from individual $3 million budgets to one large $50 million budget, just like the intro level stuff. And so I would just ask that, whether it's that simple pie chart that you had with the summary or however that is, that somebody, I could pose a bunch of dumb questions to you and you could use me as your test subject, and then you could be prepared to start the presentation off with really entry-level stuff. So I just offer myself as a test case for that request.
Thank you for this, and I mean no disrespect, Jamie, but I don't think you're a good example of a dummy subject. I think you're pretty well educated in budgets, but
I appreciate the vote of confidence.
I will, whoever does this presentation will take that into account and try and think about how we can walk everybody through this and try and merge styles that people are more accustomed to as well. So, any thoughts on? Wow. I'm going to nominate one of you to do it if nobody speaks up.
I just have to say, I think Christina did a very good job last year.
That's your way of getting at it.
No, you did. You have your teacher presentation, you have your humor, you have your understanding, so.
And I follow the money.
Yeah.
I go through everything with a fine-tooth comb so I can surely spit it back out later. So I'm happy to do that if that sounds like kind of a modified process of what we did last year. Sounds good. I'll plan on that and kind of give it a trial run at the budget information session so that if some of you could plan on attending that so that you can correct me when I'm wrong and I can make any changes before the end of the meeting. That would be very helpful. Also, the reports to be included.
So currently, we have child fine notice, the annual meeting minutes from last year, the warning articles for this year, all Frank's budget documents. Other things that in the past, and this is a suggestion, obviously, you can choose whatever you'd like. We have included things such as all of you, your names, as well as when your terms are up. We have included district administration. So all the program directors, the principals, their schools. We have Christina's report, my report, and this would be a little bit different, but our thought is that we would include reports from each of the principals that would go to the town, their town report, but also include them here as well. So that is what we were considering. Just wondering if there's anything else that you want us to include in this annual report.
Every year the Brattown report always had a chart of the actual student number enrollments over the years, and I don't know if all the other schools have those numbers or not, but I think it would be useful to continue to include that.
Yeah. Great.
I love the idea of the principal reports being in that. I think it sort of is a good way to outreach. And I am not excited to do one more thing, and before I commit to doing this, but my report that I wrote to go in the town reports, we had not finished the budget review, so I didn't have any, we weren't even close on the budget review when I needed to get that letter in, so.
You might update,
add
changing, maybe
add a paragraph or two, and when does this have to be?
Sooner rather than later, and we're assuming it would be that newsprint type thing that we do. I can get you a specific date from Barb. I have a couple of principals still. I think they're done because they had to get to town reports, but we haven't included them here yet. So
I'm just wondering if maybe I could get approval from the board that I would add a paragraph and I would have it reviewed by the vice chair to include, so that I assume it's going to be before our next meeting. So we won't have a public meeting for the board to approve me adding a paragraph or one very lengthy run-on James Joyce style paragraph, or two more concise paragraphs discussing the overall changes in the budget. Wow, $51 million in 2 paragraphs or less, okay. But I'm wondering if I should get approval from the board so that we don't have to have another meeting. That seemed like a reasonable thing. I would entertain a motion to authorize Christina Naylor to add to the previous letter information regarding the budget to be approved by the vice chair.
Moved.
Thank you, Tim.
Second.
Thank you, Thomas. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes appear to have, the ayes have it. If there's one or two of you that would like to have a copy to look at before it goes out, that would not be a violation of open meeting law, so just contact me if you'd like to, and I'll take the first two people that ask for it.
Christina?
Yes, oh, sorry, Jamie.
I just wondered, do we make reference at all, will there be introductions or sentences on the committees, the subcommittees of the school board? I just wondered if we could, the public could have information in the existence of the subcommittees and either just the naming of them, or if they have already completed their mission statements, the name of the committee and its mission statement. Just so that people know that they exist and that they're doing the work of the board.
I think I put that in my letter. I think it exists in my letter. And I'm 99% sure that it exists in my letter. And I'm 99% sure that I said the agendas are posted if you're interested in any of this work on the SU website.
Okay, good.
So,
And then also, is this how it's gonna look when it's printed? Is this how the budget's gonna look when it's printed?
No, I wanted to confirm that last meeting we talked about just publishing the summary document. So it'd be like the 10 pages, and then we definitely would want to add the enrollments and any other analysis that we generally included, and then refer in the report to the website for the detailed document. We did this several years ago for the high school, where they used to publish all of that detail in the book, and the feedback was not very good about meaningful information that you could understand. And the board approved basically that same summary format. You're able to absorb the information a lot better. So obviously that would reduce the cost of the printing as well by substantially. So that was our intent, but if there's concern about that, then we need to redirect.
so when you're trying to explain something to somebody, it's like, I'd like to be able to go to a line item, that maybe I can employ a growth mindset to this and find a way to.
I can help. The key that we've shared in the finance committee of the basic chart of accounts design. Once you have that readily available, and with those page references that I've given you, we wouldn't publish those if we didn't have the detail. But I think you'll find it's relatively easy to explain.
I have a follow-up question to that. Yeah.
I just think I have enjoyed in the past the ability to say, look, see, it's right here. Mm-hmm. So you got this plus and this minus, and so this is what was happening there. And like, oh, we cut a person, we eliminated a position, but the price went up, but the cost went up. And like, well, that's because healthcare costs went up, and so I do like being able to have that. And so, because I think you're really showing people line by line, no, this is where it all came from. If people at the UHS level, of course, that has not historically been one of our best attended budget meetings, so that might not be the best example. I like to save trees, I like to save costs. So, I don't know, does the board have any feeling one way or the other? So Jamie, you have to follow.
I feel like because this is our first year of being an emerged situation, transparency will be really critical. And so what I was requesting as a part of my earlier statement on how hard it is to navigate this document is maybe something you're referring to, which is Putney, page 1 of 14. Putney, page 2 of 14, that there is a key that people can navigate, because I couldn't figure out how to navigate this document.
So that is kind of what Frank was proposing, which is on this multicolored, on On this document here, there's a summary for Putney. So you can kind of look at Putney's expenditures overall. And you can see how direct instruction, how the various items have gone up and down. So this is what Frank was proposing. So it is more navigable from a...
Meaning as the only document the public would be presented with in the report?
As the major budget document, yeah.
With a reference to the website for the 120 pager. This will be a heck of a print job, and now that
Have you calculated it? Have you looked what it would cost?
I haven't yet, but David, do you have any idea what the Brattleboro Town report is?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can find out because Brattleboro Town does, the municipal office does a very big report like this. I just know that the feedback was very positive, and if there were issues, I'm pretty sure superintendent's office and the business office would have gotten a lot of calls about, hey, where's this and where's that. Now that things have been, the website's been upgraded, and you know, there does seem to be absolute standard that folks more and more are bringing devices to the town meetings, but they have access.
I don't mean to keep saying stuff, but I just would recommend that there be, I think on average, there's been about, how many, we had 130 people at June 25th. I would suggest that we print copies for minimally half of that population, because half that population isn't going to want to look at this, and the other half is. And if I get there and this line item isn't there, I'm going to be like, my iPhone's dead and I'm mad.
Well, the other challenge is I don't have cell phone reception at the UHS most of the time, so will there be some way that people who have their devices would be able to, could we do a temporary access for people that day so that
Steve is
nodding. He controls all passwords.
No, what we'll do is we'll just publish, we'll let you announce the password.
That day, and then...
Yeah, and then we'll just change it the next day. Do it all the time.
Okay. So maybe if we could, so that seems like a reasonable path to me, that we could have 60 copies, 50 or 60 copies like this, that are just backup for people that are living in an analog world or don't have access or whatever. And we don't have to invest in that kind of printing cost for the rest of it. That seems like a reasonable compromise. I'm getting a lot of nods from the board. A couple furrowed brows. Yes, Kelly?
Well, I think sometimes, I'll speak for myself, that sometimes seeing it on paper is helpful. But I think if you're having a big discussion of people, and some are looking at paper form, and some are looking at, electronic form, I think that it will work, because I think people will be helping each other. And I think that will work.
And the numbering will be the same, because it will just be so you could, assuming we only have one set of numbers for the documents, I think I could see that working, and I could see that saving us some money and some paper. So, does that sound good to the board? All right. Oh, Tim. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. How much did it cost last year for the June meeting? I know you had the full budget available for people, so you should have numbers on how much that costed.
I don't recall from my top of my head. I'm guessing it is close to 5,000, but it's a rough estimate.
I just had the thought that it's you could potentially have a fleet of Chromebooks up to the website, and then you could reduce your printing so that you have a station where people can go and access it.
That sounds like an interesting project for someone. I don't see Steve nodding like this.
We'll have a password ready to go.
I think if we have I think we have 60 copies, and board members bring their copies so that we're not taking the copies. I think that we'll probably muddle through. Make it 70 copies. That's way less than $5,000 with the printing, so we're still coming out fiscally ahead, and I think it'll be okay. Okay. Whew. So are we done with the whole budget thing? We've got the reports? All right. So it is 9 o'clock. We have a fair amount of business left to go. I'm wondering about the Academy addition project as well as the Academy Windows project, and if we want to go over that tonight or discuss it, or if we want to table that, since we have uncoupled it from the budget. Because I'm looking at this and thinking we have another half hour, and I could easily imagine this taking up a good hour. And the two of us flanking the end are not feeling great, so you might not have your best work after 9 o'clock from us especially. So would that be acceptable to the board that we table that conversation since it's not required to move forward with this budget? So we'll put it on for next meeting where we have a lot more space. Oh, he left? Okay. All right. So, thank you for that. So the mission statement, I am very pleased to be able to put this one to bed. So Kelly, can you review that mission statement?
Manage and review personnel matters, review and approve 1% requests, oversee supervisory union negotiations.
So that last line is a wee bit tricky because we're the SD. So I think it should be participate in supervisory union negotiations, because it really follows under, I get so confused by this. I have to look around and figure out which meeting I'm in half the time, but we're just participating. So that would be the logical group that you tap to be on the, work with the, on the SU board. And I'm wondering if you'd want to add a catch-all, like in other personnel matters as requested or something, just to give you a kind of fallback or...
Clarification.
Yes.
I'm sorry, whose mission statement is this?
For personnel.
Personnel, thank you.
Sorry, that was at the very beginning. It was the very beginning of the meeting, and I said, oh, I've got this on for later. So if you weren't here in the first like 20 seconds, it's...
I was taking notes, maybe I must have missed it, I'm sorry, thank you.
No worries. Maybe I was partying too loud. I think I was doing this, and so I might have been distracted. So do you want to tweak that, and we could want to try to approve that tonight and just tweak that for participate in supervisory union negotiations and other personnel matters as required, if that seems like a good fit?
Sure. Should I send it to you?
That would be great. And could you CC Barb? Because we could get all the mission statements up on the website under the various committees.
Can I have that too, so I can put it in the minutes? Is that okay?
And can you also CC Wendy as well? So I've passed out the mission statements from the rest of the crew on the many occasions that I thought we were going to approve our mission statements. So I would entertain a motion to approve the mission statements as presented by the committees.
So moved.
Thank you, Ann. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Tim. All those in favor of approving the mission statements of the committees, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And this is off our agenda. Unfortunately, this is not. I have not managed to talk Lyle into staying. So the superintendent search update is still ongoing. I did touch upon it as part of the SU update. While Carrie's here, do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. Covers it.
I would like to extend my thanks and eternal gratitude for Carrie Amadon for taking on this tremendous task and for being so thoughtful to a transparent process. And we're lucky to have her and Vernon as a partner district, especially right now we definitely need her. Paul, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, just a question. Is there a date for when Thrive is going to present the results of the survey?
Oh yeah, I said that earlier. Next Wednesday, we have an SU meeting and we are hopefully going to approve language for an advertisement and see the results of the survey because we were kind of condensing timelines and trying to get to a finished product by next Wednesday so we could get it out by the end of January, get things out by the end of January and keep things moving. So it's maybe not ideal, again, but ideal, is getting the position filled. So.
And that meeting is at 5, right?
6. No, were we? I can't
We're at
remember.
5.
We were 5, you were 6?
Not yet.
But, okay, so we're 5. We're 5.
Yeah.
Did we have a where yet? Did we get?
Right now, we're central office.
Okay. This could be tight. Could be tight.
Yeah, we were going there because you were at
Green
the
Street.
library and we were trying to stay
We were going to try
close.
to do Green Street, but they couldn't.
But yeah, we can't do Green Street, so the closest to the library
Yeah,
was,
the library wasn't available.
and the library is not available
And
for
Green
us.
Street doesn't have or they're like custodians, so not sure.
Right. So we're sort of in a little bit of a bind. But if we're packed in, we will all talk quickly.
All right, excellent. I wanted to, I think, Lyle, you had put together, so moving on, there's no other unfinished business that I'm aware of, correct? We had spoken about reviewing our meeting schedule. I think Lyle had put together something. I could go on to the next item and actually come back to that if that works for you, Lyle. I was thinking we should have a candidates night because we have a lot of open positions and I think that was pretty helpful to get that up on BCTV. So I wanted to get, to see if the board was interested in doing that again. And if the board was interested also in having BCTV film that. So when we would do that, because we'd have to do it coming up pretty soon. Are there any contested seats that we know of?
I think we'll have one.
Oh, there's one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brattleboro doesn't.
I have a 3-year seniors contestant so far.
Oh, okay. Okay, so there are contested seats, so we really definitely should do this. So I was wondering if there was any,
Well,
Steve,
it's
you-
also,
Sorry.
it's also people in the surrounding, in the town next door don't know the people that are running from the town next
Right.
door. So it really, having a profile and having a number of ways to look at it would be.
No, I really,
And I'm not coming up with this. This is all coming from Jamie. So to give credit where it's due.
I put this on here by my very lonesome, but people said, no, I don't want to do a candidate tonight. What am I going to do? So Steve, did you have a thought or were you just trying to stay awake? Okay, I thought you were raising your hand.
I'm wide awake.
Call it like it is. So sometime, so we've
What
got
about
February.
March 2nd, Monday night, March 2nd?
It hasn't,
They can't put up on.
they have to put it up on BCTV.
They won't be up on this.
You need a couple days for it to be available on BCTV.
I mean, the vote's on the 3rd.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. In my head, it was on the 17th, I'm sorry.
So, no, that's our annual meeting. So what seems like a good week to me would be somewhere between the 25th and 29th, because the previous week is school vacation. So that's not a good week. And I think if we go too far before that, you're not gonna have, like, just, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I tend to do things that are in my 1 week frame. Yes, David?
I'm not sure how it works in the other towns, but I think the early voting, I believe, begins on the 11th, or maybe even earlier. And a lot of people, Brattleboro gets 30 or 40% of the people voting early.
Oh.
So I would say, do it in the second or the latest, the third week of February. But is the second week, or is this week of the 17th?
That's vacation.
That's vacation week. Well, that'd be a good time to do it.
So maybe the 11th, the 12th, or the 13th, because Valentine's Day would also probably not be a popular night to do it.
Well, 14th is Valentine's Day.
I mean, the 10th, 11th, and 12th, I'm sorry. Oh, the 10th through I'm sorry, I'm working on a weird calendar that has the weekends at the end. So the 10th through the 13th, because of early voting, might be the best time to do it then.
The Monday night, I was thinking the 10th, potentially the 11th, February 11th, the Tuesday night.
I guess administration doesn't need to be, that's when you all can miss. You can catch that in reruns when you have insomnia.
I guess for clarification, so is the intention that there'll be an actual candidate night, but there'll also be like candidate statements or some written material in case what happens if not all the candidates can show?
That typically hasn't been a board. Usually the newspapers have managed that. If Communications Council wants to reach out to the newspapers maybe and see if they want to do that, but that has not been a board-driven procedure.
I wanted to offer to do a draft. I had done one back earlier in spring and do an updated draft of a candidate questionnaire that would go to all the candidates, and then see if somebody wanted to help do editing, and then suggest that be a candidate questionnaire for all the candidates.
That's how we used to do it. We did it in Putney in the last legacy cycle.
Hello, Sam, Communications Council. What do you think about that concept?
No problem to do that.
All right. Does that sound good to the board? Yes?
I'm curious why it wouldn't be something that would be in the board's interest to facilitate, to formally ask candidates, once they're nominated and we have their the petitions are approved, to contact them directly and ask them to, maybe even a format, a group of questions, so that they're responding to similar questions or similar prompts.
That's what Jamie was just proposing.
Yeah, but I was thinking.
As a function of the Communications Council or something.
Oh, I see. So the committee
Well,
would.
I was offering it as a volunteer, but I'm also a volunteer at the Communications Council, so if we wanted to house it within the board, we could in the Communications Council with the clerk's permission.
But is there any reason not, I can't think of a reason that we wouldn't want to do that, but that doesn't mean there isn't one. Too late for anybody.
I don't know, I don't know, it's never been done, so I'm just kind of thinking about it because.
We've never had this multi-town elections before.
And it was always handled in Dummerston by an external source, so the questions were not loaded by a board maybe. So I could imagine you could, if you had a board that was contentious, which ours is not, but you could phrase things in such a way that you could, whatever, so maybe that's why that you are just an existing board that is impartial as to who serves and it's for outside resources. That I do feel a certain separation. I'm okay with a non-judgmental questionnaire going out that people can answer.
Just ask for a statement, yeah.
But I kind of feel like if we muddy our hands in it too much, it just opens the door for a certain level of.
Yeah, as I said, I just never even thought of it before. Just say your name and candidate statement, please, and that's the end of it. They can say what they want.
But I think some suggested questions that people can avoid or not, is a great.
And then would you want to put them up on our website so people can see them? Because where would they go?
I think that's what we did last time, is I asked that we feed them back to central office, all the candidate statements, and I think Barb posted them, if I remember correctly. I think there was one major document of everybody's put together.
Would that seem
Should they
reasonable to
submit a
Barb?
picture?
So that seems reasonable.
If it comes in a Word document, then
Yeah.
she can cut it and paste it in
Yeah.
so that we can put it all in one.
But I think we should reach out to the Reformer and the Commons as well, so that. Thank you, Tim, thank you, Jamie, again, for your tireless volunteerism.
So did we?
So back to the dates.
Oh, right.
So somewhere between the 10th and the 13th, Monday or Tuesday may be better. Unfortunately, I can't contact all the candidates now to find out what works for them. But we kind of have to get it on the schedule, so
Monday.
Monday the 10th, okay. What are you looking at me like that? No, not good? Not good for you? The 11th better?
Okay.
The good thing about the 11th is actually I do have 2 meetings in Brattleboro groups on the 10th, so I don't know if any on the 11th.
Okay, so let's go with the 11th. February 11th for the candidates' night. And he's walking out before we can ask for his building use again. For candidates' night.
No, it's just stretching.
You were raising your hand to offer.
That week is the week of the musical, the art form will be out of service.
We did it oh no, we did it for bands.
We did it there.
We did
Yeah.
it.
It's a nicer room.
Yeah.
The bands is?
Well, not nicer, it's quieter.
All right, so
Okay, so we'll hit up bands.
We'll sit, yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
He's not here, so we can,
Yeah, he left, so let's have.
don't teach him, that'll learn him.
And a time, just so that,
6, so you can.
6 is a good time usually for working
And then
folks
we
to
meet
make
the next
meetings.
Wow.
I just remembered that February 11th is the New Hampshire primary. I don't think that matters, but it's just, so for some of us nerds, it matters.
You'll be home in time to get the
Results?
results. It's only a candidate's night, it's not controversial. So how will I get emails of everybody who has put in?
I'm happy to call all of the town clerks and request all the data if you want.
Oh, that'd be great.
And feed
Okay.
it back to you.
That would be
But
great.
that would have to happen on the 28th of January.
Right, once we get everything back. Yeah, that's not, yeah.
Yeah.
Whew, that's
I've called them before and requested, I can ask them if they want.
Well, also we can find out who's pulled petitions because maybe, at least we could contact the people who've pulled petitions.
I've been told by Putney Town Clerk, you don't actually have to pull a petition, you can print it off.
Oh,
So you wouldn't
there
even
may
know
be-
who's pulled a petition until they delivered signatures on the 27th.
Okay,
That's Monday, it's not that far away.
that's true. It's just so tight into the next week that whatever. But it is what it is. We've scheduled, we put the date in stone. It is written and it shall be. So
Did you choose a time?
we did 6 o'clock. So the board retirements were any teacher retirements that we needed to accept, not board retirements, but we already did that.
We did that, yeah.
So we're ahead of the game.
so Frank and I sitting here realized that we're gonna need you, seeing you passed the budget, to also approve the warning articles. So I have copies of last year's. They're cross-outs because we wouldn't use the same. Frank will put in the actual figures.
Yeah.
Unfinished business, other business?
Yeah, we're on unfinished business, other business.
Okay.
They didn't realize this needed to be done. Yeah. So we don't have to put the increase on this anymore?
Yeah, we would, we'll fill in the, oh, you know what, because this was the first year,
Oh, so
there was no
there's no
prior.
increase.
But I will add that. It is a standard article, it's still in the statute.
I was like, they got rid of something?
Yeah,
What
no.
chances?
Yeah. So it's, you know, it's right on that yellow, I mean, the tax sheet in the summary document that we looked at.
So shall I read through Article 3 as it will be amended to approve this?
Sure.
Does that make sense? So everything else is as written here on the warning, with the exception of Article 3, which will read, shall the voters of the school district authorize the school board to expend, dang it, $51,171,301.
300. That's a spreadsheet, I mean.
Oh, okay. So $300, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. Where does the percent increase go in that?
It's the equalized student, the cost per equalized student, that's where it goes.
It is estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $18,954 per equalized pupil, which is is it the 4.2 or the 1.8?
4.2.
Which is a 4.2% increase over the previous fiscal year.
Yeah.
So I would entertain a motion to approve the warning as amended.
And we don't need Article 4, just because that was, once it's created, you're done with that.
Lyle has scratched it out, so.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We had removed the date of May 22nd and Article 4. So I would entertain a motion to approve the warning as amended.
So moved.
I think Tim moved it. Who was the second?
Second.
Thank you, David. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the warning for the annual meeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes clear to have it, the ayes have it, and it is warned. The meeting schedule, we're going back to that, right?
So we have February 5 as the next meeting, back at Cusick. February 26, so that we've missed vacation week in Putney. March 4 at Cusick. March 17 is the annual meeting. And then the next night is a scheduled meeting at Academy, so March 18. And that would be the reorganization.
The reorg meeting would be that next day?
Yeah.
Okay.
At Academy School. April 1st at Cusick. April 15th at Dummerston. May 6 at Cusick. May 20 at Green Street. June 3 at Cusick. June 17 is a scheduled meeting. That is graduation week. So when we get to June 3, we may want to, or we can do it now, look to see if we want to go the week before, the week after. June 17 is generally BAM's move-up day. I don't think it's any of the outlying towns. So that would either be June 10 or June 24, whichever your pleasure.
So probably wait till the new board has reorganized, because there'll be a lot of new people. So that would be a better time to determine that last meeting schedule, and some other late entrants may have come into the June schedule, which sometimes happens. Okay, any other business before us that I have dropped off somewhere?
I just wanted to make my request again. The email I referenced or sent you some months ago, Lyle and Christina, requesting that instead of the cycle that we are on for the towns and where the meetings are happening, that we look at having every fourth meeting in a different town. Because the way it's going right now is the folks from Putney and other towns are driving to, I can't even figure out the percentage of the board meetings are in Brattleboro. And so I'm just requesting, I remember you all saying, this isn't the time, we need to just rest. We've got to get things, or not rest, there was no rest in that. I think you said, let's get things settled. Let's get things settled, we just need to do the work. And so I want to keep requesting that we have a cycle that allows Putney and Dummerston and Guilford and Brattleboro to each be the site of a meeting every fourth meeting, if that makes sense. And then I sent you a schedule of that in an email, and I can resend that. Just so that people don't have to travel as far all the time. And it makes it more accessible to communities, and it sends a message of equity.
So there's like multiple ways, as I've discovered. There's so many ways to consider equity, and part of it is that Brattleboro is the largest district. So in theory, it's the largest, and it has the largest number of school sites. And to be sure, us meeting at Cusick is heavily invested there, but that is where half of our students are in that BUHS complex. So it's hard exactly to figure out what is exactly equitable when you consider the number of people from Brattleboro that would have to, there are multiple ways we could argue this well into the night.
And I don't intend to argue it well into the night. I just wanted to reiterate a desire.
Yeah. So is there any interest on the board's part to amend this schedule in any way for the upcoming, I guess?
Or to consider it at a future meeting.
Oh, well that, yeah, I think that.
Pass it on to the new board.
Yeah, I think that might be an interesting question at reorganization. Well, it's going to be different people, so for us to make a decision now when there's seats are changing and new people are coming on.
And we could revisit the decision to be at Cusick every other meeting.
Yeah.
To maybe do that once a month.
Wasn't that satisfying a state requirement that we have a regular time and meeting place? That's why we picked it.
You have to warn it. You have to warn every single meeting if you don't have a regular.
Right. And that's
so
a pain
it
for
probably
them.
was, yeah. But we warn them anyway. What's the difference?
But it doesn't show, if it doesn't show up in the newspaper, if the reformer or one of the newspapers fails to print it, we can't have the meeting.
We don't warn, we warn the radio station, right? Isn't that our formal?
No, it's the reformer.
It has to be a paper of record.
And then it goes to all the town clerks, it goes to all the schools, and of course our website.
And this happened actually in the course of the study committee, that because there was not a regular time and meeting place for those meetings, and it didn't land in the reformer, so it was not warned appropriately, so we couldn't have a meeting. So
do we have to pay the reform to make sure it gets in there every time? Is that how
I don't know if it's...
Yeah, if it just goes in the calendar, they can do it or not.
Yeah.
They don't have a commitment to serve us, we have to... Well, that stinks. That's really stupid.
contact your legislator. Open meeting law is meant to make things better, but can make things problematic sometimes in terms of transparency and accessibility.
Well, it makes it hard to make Jamie happy.
A lot of people feel that way.
It's late now, I can tell.
Okay, moving right along. Any other public comment on non-agenda items? That was accepting retirements by the board, and Lyle had done that in her administrative update, so that was done.
Christina, we need to understand how to calculate quorum for our leadership council, because we didn't call the last meeting to order because we had, I don't know, what was it, 6 people? But we have such a large group of people who said they were interested.
If they have not been appointed by the board, I would not consider them to be part of the leadership council.
They
That would not
were
constitute-
appointed by the board, the teachers did.
The staff and teachers were not appointed. was just community members appointed.
We appointed some staff.
Yep. Staff
It's in the
has been
minutes.
appointed
Okay,
for those
so
councils
the
that have-
staff, okay.
So there's a very large number of people appointed and very, so we just have to figure that out, and if we're subject to quorum rules.
It's the ruling I got from the Attorney General's office that if you're a council that advises the board, created by the board, that you are subject to open meeting law.
Which means we need to know what our, okay.
So that means that it, and
If you
anybody
want to
can
conduct
attend.
business, if you want to just talk.
I don't know if this is relevant necessarily, but I remember when I was looking into quorum before, that it was relevant whether the people actually could regularly attend. And that perhaps if people are, I think there may be people on the list, I only went to one meeting, who we appointed who, at least the one meeting I went to, they weren't there. So at some point, perhaps it could be considered that people who, even if they were appointed, don't come, that they could not count towards quorum, potentially. I don't know whether that,
I've never read that.
I believe I did when I was looking into it for the subcommittee quorum issue.
Well, I'll have to look into that. I've only seen,
It may be that it's a Robert's Rules thing, not a state law thing.
okay, I think you're talking about Robert's rules.
Yeah.
Robert's rules, that's true, but open meeting law for appointed positions, I don't think that's true, but that's interesting, I'll look into that. I'll bother the Secretary of State's office with that one and find out, but that was my understanding, that just because there might be two deadbeat board members, we can have a meeting if, you know, 2 or 3 of us show up, that's my understanding. We don't have any deadbeat board members, I don't mean to say that, but.
So, point of clarification, can you provide to each one of the chairs of each of your committees who's been appointed, and then also instructions on how you unappoint somebody? Like, do they have to write a formal letter? Do you just vote on it? Like, how do you, if someone isn't coming to a meeting and said they want to, how do you make them not part of your quorum count?
That's an interesting question.
I think what we'll do is we'll set up a meeting date. Liz and I'll send an email out, tell folks who need to make quorum, ask folks if they're planning on regularly attending the meetings, and if not, we'll send you a list of those names.
Okay.
Because we got to move that ship along.
Well, we're having trouble with the time of meetings. There's friction.
I get it. It's a big challenge getting these up and running, and I appreciate all you've done in Putney to get this up and going. And I will find it, I'll tease it out of all our meeting minutes, all the people that have been approved for Putney.
I have Putney people.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm the clerk, so I'm asking as a clerk. Do you remember what meeting minutes were, what date when they were approved?
Yeah, the parents/community members were on November 20th, and the 4 faculty members were on the 4th of December.
The 4th of December?
Mhm. I sent you this list, Amy.
Yeah, I have it.
Oh, you
So
do?
I'll forward it to you.
Oh.
Bing, done. Thank you, Anne. Done before
I
we
only
left
did
the
that
building.
for Putney, I didn't do it for anybody else, so.
I haven't had a request from anybody else, so we'll go with that. And so, with that, I assume there's no other public comment on non-agenda items. We have one very short executive session under 1 VSA 313 to discuss evaluation of an employee.
So Mary has set up a room for us so that Rich can stay here.
Mary, you're the best.
Isn't she the best?
Do what I can.
Thank you.
I even turned the heat on.
Oh, and this works out for you too.
Do you have a decision?
I don't know.